Hello. Welcome to Cowboy Heart Stories. Sometimes, journeys that begin with pain lead us to where we truly belong. And today, let's step into the story of a girl who was sent away as a joke, but ended up changing her destiny. Mara Wells stood in the back of the wagon, her father's final words still burning in her ears. "You'll do what your sister won't. Marry a stranger and disappear." The Iron Hollow Ranch stretched before her like a sentence, all dust and silence under a merciless Wyoming sun. She wasn't a bride. She was a punishment delivered in petticoats, sent to humiliate a rancher who'd asked for beauty and received the daughter no one wanted. The man waiting at the fence didn't smile. He didn't even speak. He just stared. And Mara knew with absolute certainty that she had been sent here to fail. Before we begin Mara's journey from rejection to redemption, I invite you to stay with us until the very end of this story. If it moves you, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far Mara's story travels across the world. Now, let's step into the dust and heartbreak of Iron Hollow Ranch. The wagon lurched to a stop, and Mara's stomach dropped with it. She'd been traveling for 6 days. 6 days of her father's hired man driving in silence. 6 days of sleeping under stars that offered no comfort. 6 days of knowing exactly what waited at the end of this road. Not a husband, not a home, just the final, crushing proof that Samuel Wells had found a use for the daughter he'd spent 23 years wishing didn't exist. "This is it," the driver said without looking at her. He'd barely spoken a dozen words since they'd left Pennsylvania. Her father had paid him well for his silence. Mara climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady after so many days of travel. The Wyoming wind hit her immediately, dry and sharp, carrying the smell of sage and something else, something wilder she couldn't name. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, all rolling grassland and distant mountains, beautiful in a way that felt deliberately indifferent to human suffering. Iron Hollow Ranch sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by rough timber fencing that had seen better years. The main house was sturdy but plain, built from dark wood that had weathered to gray in places. A barn stood to the left, and beyond that, corrals where horses moved restlessly in the afternoon heat. Everything looked functional, well-maintained, and completely unwelcoming. A man stood by the corral fence, watching her. Even from a distance, Mara could see the exact moment he understood. His posture changed, shoulders going rigid, hands tightening on the fence rail. He'd been expecting someone else. Someone beautiful, someone like Lena. Mara's throat tightened. She forced herself to stand straight, to meet his stare, even though everything in her wanted to climb back into that wagon and disappear into the prairie. The driver was already unloading her trunk, one small battered trunk that held everything she owned. Her father hadn't even pretended generosity. The trunk hit the ground with a heavy thud that sounded too much like finality. "Miss Wells," the driver said, the first time he'd addressed her directly. "I'll be heading back now." "Of course." Her voice came out steady, which felt like a small miracle. "Thank you for the journey." He nodded once, climbed back onto the wagon, and turned the horses without another word. Within moments, he was gone, leaving nothing but dust settling slowly in the still air. Mara was alone with the man by the corral. He started walking toward her, his stride long and deliberate. As he got closer, she could make out more details. Tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter storms. His face was hard, all sharp angles and compressed anger. He wore work clothes, dusty and practical, and moved like a man who'd spent his entire life doing hard labor under an unforgiving sun. When he stopped in front of her, she could see the fury radiating off him like heat. "You're not Lena Wells," he said. His voice was rough, low, and absolutely certain. "No," Mara said quietly. "I'm her sister, Mara. I didn't send for you." "I know." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she wasn't going to pretend, wasn't going to offer excuses or false promises. The silence stretched between them, taut as wire. "Your father sent a letter 3 months ago," he said finally. Said his daughter Lena would arrive in September. Said she was accomplished, refined, and willing to marry a rancher she'd never met. His jaw worked. "I sent money for her passage. Good money." Mara said nothing. What could she possibly say? That her father had pocketed that money without a second thought? That Lena had laughed when she'd found out about the arrangement, had called it absolutely barbaric, and refused to even consider leaving Philadelphia? That Samuel Wells had looked at his 2 daughters and made a calculation so cold it had stolen Mara's breath? Send the pretty one, lose a valuable piece on the board. Send the other one. Well, that's just taking out the trash. So, Jonah Reed continued, his voice hard as the ground beneath their feet, I'm going to ask you straight. Did your father send you here thinking I wouldn't notice? That I'd just accept whoever showed up and be grateful? No, Mara said, and watched his eyebrows rise slightly at her honesty. He sent me here knowing you'd notice, knowing you'd be angry. That was the point. The point. He repeated it like the words didn't make sense. Mara lifted her chin. You wanted a mail-order bride. You got one. Just not the one you paid for. She paused, then added with brittle precision, My father finds that hilarious. Jonah stared at her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes that might have been respect if it wasn't buried under so much rage. And you? What do you find it? Cruel, she said simply. But I didn't have a choice in coming here. And you don't have a choice in what to do with me now. So we're both stuck with my father's idea of a joke. The wind picked up, pulling strands of dark hair from Mara's braid and whipping them across her face. She didn't brush them away. She just stood there, holding this stranger's furious gaze, refusing to flinch or apologize for existing. I could put you on the next wagon east, Jonah said. You could. Should put you on the next wagon east. Probably. You've got no claim here, no legal standing. I didn't marry you, didn't even agree to you coming. All true, Mara agreed. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but she kept her voice level. But we both know you won't. His eyes narrowed. And why is that? Because you need a wife, she said quietly. You wouldn't have sent for one otherwise. And I'm here. I can work. I don't expect kindness or affection or anything beyond a roof and basic provisions. Whatever you needed Lena for, I can do it. I'm stronger than I look. It was the truth, and also the saddest thing she'd ever had to say about herself. Jonah's jaw tightened. He looked away from her, out toward the rolling grassland, and she saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. When he finally looked back, his expression had shifted into something colder, more distant. Fine, he said flatly. You can stay, but understand this. You're not a bride. You're not a wife. You're a hired hand who happens to sleep in the house because I can't have it said I made a woman sleep in the barn. He paused. You'll work for your keep. You'll earn every meal, every night under this roof. And if you can't keep up, if you cause trouble or make demands, you're gone. Clear? Clear, Mara said. Good. He turned and started walking toward the house. Over his shoulder, he added, Bring your trunk. I'm not carrying it for you. Mara looked down at the heavy trunk, then at his retreating back. She bent, grabbed the leather handles, and lifted. The trunk was heavier than she'd expected. Her father had packed it with old clothes, worn linens, nothing of value but enough weight to make a point. She staggered slightly, caught her balance, and started dragging it across the hard-packed dirt. Every step sent pain shooting through her shoulders and back. The trunk left a groove in the earth behind her. Sweat began to bead on her forehead, despite the cooling afternoon air. But she didn't stop, didn't call out for help, didn't even let herself breathe hard enough for Jonah to hear her struggling. By the time she reached the porch steps, her arms were shaking. Jonah stood in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. When she finally got the trunk onto the porch, he stepped aside without offering a hand. Inside, he said. First room on the left. The house was dark after the bright sunshine, and it took Mara's eyes a moment to adjust. The main room was simple but well built. Wooden floors, a stone fireplace, furniture that looked handmade and sturdy. Everything was clean but impersonal, like a place where someone lived but didn't quite inhabit. The room he'd indicated was small, barely large enough for the narrow bed and simple dresser it contained. A single window looked out toward the mountains. The bed had a quilt folded at the foot. Wedding ring pattern, she noticed, made with careful stitches and blues and creams. Someone had made that quilt with hope. Not for her, though. You'll sleep here, Jonah said from the doorway. Outhouse is out back. Water pump is by the barn. Breakfast is at dawn. If you're not up, you don't eat until dinner. Understood. And Mara? He waited until she looked at him. Don't get comfortable. This isn't permanent. This is me figuring out what to do with a problem I didn't ask for. Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, the front door closing with deliberate firmness behind him. Mara sat down on the bed, her legs finally giving out. The quilt was soft under her fingers, the stitches even and precise. She wondered who had made it, wondered what had happened to make Jonah Reed the kind of man who would send for a mail-order bride in the first place. Then she stopped wondering because it didn't matter. None of it mattered except surviving whatever came next. She unpacked her trunk slowly, hanging her few dresses in the narrow closet, placing her mother's Bible and her own journal in the dresser drawer. The Bible had been the only thing her father had allowed her to bring that had any value, sentimental value anyway. He'd made it clear that Lena would inherit everything else. When everything was put away, Mara sat down at the window and looked out at the vast Wyoming landscape. The sun was starting to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely way. She'd traveled 2,000 miles to become a joke, but she was still here, still breathing, still capable of making this brutal, unwelcoming place into something that resembled a life. It would have to be enough. Whoa. The next morning, Mara woke to darkness and the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. She dressed quickly in her oldest work dress, brown cotton, practical, already worn thin at the elbows, and braided her hair with fingers that trembled slightly from nervousness. When she emerged from her room, Jonah was at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet. He glanced at her, then went back to cooking without a word. "What can I do?" Mara asked. "Coffee's on the stove. Pour yourself a cup if you want it." She did, grateful for something to do with her hands. The coffee was strong and bitter, no sugar or cream in sight. She drank it anyway, standing by the window while Jonah finished cooking. He put a plate on the table, eggs, bacon, thick slices of bread fried in the bacon grease, and sat down to eat. After a moment, Mara realized he'd only made one plate. "Am I not eating?" she asked carefully. Jonah looked up, his expression flat. "You want to eat? You cook. I'm not your servant." Mara set down her coffee cup and moved to the stove. There were more eggs in a bowl on the counter, more bacon in the cold box. She'd been cooking since she was tall enough to reach the stove. Her father had insisted both his daughters learn practical skills, even if he'd only valued Lena's decorative ones. She cooked in silence, aware of Jonah eating behind her, aware of his gaze on her back measuring, judging. When her eggs were done, she slid them onto a plate and sat down across from him. They ate without speaking. When Jonah finished, he pushed back from the table and stood. "Dishes are your responsibility. When you're done, meet me at the barn. Wear boots if you have them. If you don't, you'll ruin your shoes." "I have boots," Mara said. He nodded once and left. Mara finished her breakfast, washed both plates and the skillet, and went to change into her work boots, scuffed leather that had belonged to one of her father's stable hands before he'd outgrown them. They were too large, but she'd stuffed the toes with newspaper. The morning air was cool and sweet, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east. Mara crossed the yard to the barn, where Jonah was already saddling a horse, a big gray gelding with kind eyes. "You ride?" he asked without looking at her. "Yes." "How well?" "Well enough not to fall off." He made a sound that might have been amusement or skepticism. "We'll see. Take the sorrel mare in the third stall, saddles on the wall. If you can't tack up yourself, this isn't going to work." Mara went to the stall he'd indicated. The mare was smaller than Jonah's gelding, reddish-brown with a white blaze down her face. She nickered softly when Mara approached, curious but not unfriendly. "Hey girl," Mara murmured, running a hand down the mare's neck. "Let's not make me look like a fool, all right?" She found the saddle, worn but well-maintained, and carried it to the stall. The mare stood patiently while Mara tacked her up, only shifting once when Mara had to adjust the girth. By the time she led the horse out into the yard, Jonah was already mounted and waiting. He looked at her saddle, her posture, the way she handled the mare. Then he gave a short nod. "Good enough. Let's go." They rode out as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, turning the grassland golden. Jonah set a steady pace and Mara followed, her body remembering the rhythm of riding even though it had been months since she'd been on a horse. "This is the north pasture," Jonah said, the first words he'd spoken since they'd left the barn. 200 acres, give or take. Cattle graze here spring through fall. We're checking the fence line for breaks, and I need to count the herd." "How many head?" Mara asked. "Should be 43. Lost one to wolves last month." They rode in silence for a while, following the fence line. Jonah dismounted periodically to check posts, test wire tension, hammer in stakes that had worked loose. Mara stayed on the mare, watching the landscape, watching him work. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done these tasks 1,000 times. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Despite the anger she'd seen yesterday, out here he seemed calmer, more settled. This was his element, the open land, the physical work, the solitude. "There," he said suddenly, pointing to a section of fence where the wire had snapped. "I'll need to splice it. In the saddlebag, there's wire and pliers." Mara dismounted and found the tools. She brought them to him, then stood back and watched as he worked the wire, his hands quick and sure despite the sharp edges. "You planning to just watch?" he said without looking up. "Or you planning to learn?" "Learn," Mara said immediately. "Then pay attention." He showed her how to twist the wire, how to tension it properly, how to secure it so it wouldn't immediately snap again under pressure. His instructions were clear and impersonal, like he was training a new ranch hand rather than teaching a woman who was supposed to be his bride. When the repair was finished, they mounted again and continued. By mid-morning, they'd completed the fence check and found the cattle, all 43 head, grazing peacefully in the northern corner of the pasture. Jonah counted them twice, his lips moving silently, then nodded to himself. "We're heading back," he said. "There's work at the house." The ride back was faster, and by the time they reached the barn, Mara's thighs were aching and her lower back was tight. She dismounted carefully, trying not to let Jonah see how stiff she was. "Untack your horse," he said. "Wipe her down, check her hooves, give her water, then meet me behind the house." Mara did as instructed, taking her time to make sure the mare was properly cared for. When she finally walked around to the back of the house, she found Jonah standing beside a large vegetable garden that had been taken over by weeds. He held out a shovel. "This was my mother's garden," he said flatly. "She died 2 years ago. It's gone to hell since then. You're going to clear it, turn the soil, and get it ready for spring planting." Mara looked at the garden, easily a quarter acre, choked with thistles and dead vines and stubborn prairie grass that had invaded from the edges. It would take days, maybe weeks. "All right," she said, and took the shovel. Jonah studied her for a long moment, like he was waiting for her to protest or complain. When she didn't, something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, but close. "Dinner's at 6, he said. "You can stop then." Then he walked away, leaving her alone with the shovel and the impossible task. Mara looked at the garden, at the shovel in her hands, at the sun climbing higher in the sky. Then she drove the blade into the earth and started digging. By the time the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Mara had cleared perhaps 1/10 of the garden. Her hands were blistered despite her gloves, her back screamed with every movement, and her arms felt like they were made of lead. Sweat had soaked through her dress, and her face was streaked with dirt. But she'd made progress. Visible, measurable progress. She stabbed the shovel into the ground one last time and headed inside to clean up for dinner. Jonah was already at the stove when she entered, cooking what smelled like stew. He glanced at her, took in her disheveled appearance, her obvious exhaustion, but said nothing. Mara washed her hands and face at the kitchen pump, then sat down at the table without being invited. Her legs nearly gave out when she lowered herself into the chair. Jonah put a bowl of stew in front of her. It was simple but good. Beef and potatoes and carrots in a rich broth. Mara ate slowly, trying not to let her hands shake from fatigue. "How much did you clear?" Jonah asked. "Maybe 1/10, less probably." He nodded, spooning stew into his mouth. "That's more than I expected." It wasn't a compliment exactly, but it wasn't criticism either. They ate in silence until their bowls were empty. Then Jonah stood, collected the dishes, and began washing them in the sink. Mara watched him, surprised. "I thought dishes were my responsibility." "They are," he said without turning around. "Tomorrow. Tonight you look like you might fall over if you stand up." She wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could handle it, but her body was screaming for rest. Instead, she said quietly, Thank you. Jonah's shoulders tensed slightly, but he didn't respond. Mara went to her room, peeled off her filthy clothes, and fell into bed still wearing her chemise. The last thing she remembered before sleep took her was the sound of Jonah moving around the house, his footsteps solid and somehow comforting in the darkness. The days that followed settled into a brutal routine. Mara woke before dawn, dressed in darkness, and met Jonah in the kitchen, where they ate breakfast in silence. Then they worked, riding fence lines, checking cattle, repairing equipment, mucking stalls. Whatever Jonah needed done, Mara did without complaint. In the afternoons, she returned to the garden, slowly reclaiming it from the weeds. Her hands developed thick calluses. Her arms grew stronger. Her back stopped screaming quite so loudly. Jonah watched her work with an expression she couldn't read. He never praised her, never offered encouragement, but he also never sent her away, never told her she wasn't good enough. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, he started teaching her how to read the weather in the morning sky, how to spot a cow in distress from 100 yards away, how to sharpen a blade properly, change a horseshoe, bind a wound. Practical knowledge delivered in few words, always focused on the task at hand. Mara absorbed it all hungrily. Every skill made her more valuable, more necessary. Every lesson was proof that she could do this, could survive here. They still barely spoke beyond what was required for work. Jonah remained distant, cold, locked behind walls so thick she wasn't sure anyone had ever gotten through them. But sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she'd catch him watching her with something that wasn't quite anger anymore. She didn't let herself hope it meant anything. Hope was dangerous. On her 10th day at Iron Hollow Ranch, everything changed. They were in town, a small collection of buildings called Sage Creek, about an hour's ride from the ranch. Jonah needed supplies, and he told Mara to come along to help carry things. The general store was run by a thin man with suspicious eyes and his wife, who looked at Mara with poorly concealed curiosity. Word had clearly spread that Jonah Reed's mail-order bride had arrived, and that she wasn't what anyone expected. "Morning, Jonah," the shopkeeper said. His gaze slid to Mara. "This her, then?" "This is Mara Wells," Jonah said shortly. "I need flour, coffee, sugar, salt, 20 pounds of each." The shopkeeper's wife, Mrs. Patterson, according to the sign, moved closer, her eyes traveling over Mara with unconcealed assessment. "My goodness, I heard you'd sent for a bride from back east. I suppose I was expecting someone different." The pause before different was deliberate, calculated to wound. Mara kept her expression neutral. She'd heard worse, had lived with worse her entire life. But beside her, Jonah went very still. "The supplies, Patterson," he said, his voice dropping into a register that made the shopkeeper step back. "Now." Of course," Patterson said quickly. "Clara, help the man." Mrs. Patterson moved to fill the order, but she wasn't done. As she measured out flour, she said conversationally, "I hope you know what you're getting into, Mr. Reed. A woman like that, well, she'll eat you out of house and home, won't she? Probably why her daddy sent her away. Too expensive to keep." The words hit like a slap. Mara's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms hard enough to hurt. "That's enough," Jonah said. Mrs. Patterson blinked at him. "I'm just saying, I don't care what you're just saying. Finish the order and keep your thoughts to yourself." The woman's face flushed. She finished measuring the supplies in hostile silence, slapping the bags down on the counter with more force than necessary. Jonah paid, counted out the exact amount without a word, and started loading supplies into the wagon. Mara helped, keeping her head down, not looking at the Pattersons or the other customers who had stopped to watch the show. They were almost done when a woman's voice rang out across the store. Well, so the rumors are true." Mara looked up to find a beautiful blonde woman standing in the doorway, dressed in an expensive traveling suit, and looking at Mara with undisguised disdain. Beside her, Jonah went absolutely rigid. "Vanessa," he said, his voice flat as the prairie. "What are you doing here?" The woman, Vanessa, smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "I heard the most fascinating story, Jonah, that you'd sent east for a mail-order bride. I simply had to come see if it was true." Her gaze swept over Mara again. "Though I must say, I'm surprised at your choice." "I didn't choose her," Jonah said bluntly. She was sent in place of her sister. Vanessa's eyebrows rose. A substitution? How deliciously scandalous. She moved closer, circling Mara like a predator. And you kept her anyway? How generous of you, Jonah. How very charitable. Mara had had enough. She straightened to her full height, looked Vanessa directly in the eye, and said quietly, "I work for my keep, ma'am. There's nothing charitable about it." Vanessa's smile sharpened. "Work? How quaint." She turned back to Jonah. "Are you really this desperate, Jonah? So desperate you'll take whatever gets delivered to your door?" "Careful, Vanessa," Jonah said, his voice carrying warning. "Or what?" Vanessa laughed. "You'll defend her honor? This woman who was sent here as a joke?" She leaned closer to Jonah, her voice dropping into something more intimate. "You could have had me, you know. I would have said yes if you'd asked properly, but you were too proud, too stubborn." She gestured at Mara dismissively. "And now look what you've settled for." The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in the store was staring. Mrs. Patterson wore an expression of savage satisfaction. The shopkeeper looked uncomfortable. And Vanessa stood there, beautiful and cruel, waiting for Jonah to respond. Mara felt something inside her crack, not break entirely, but fracture in a way that let all the humiliation and exhaustion and loneliness of the past 10 days come flooding in. She'd known she wasn't wanted, had known from the moment she'd stepped off that wagon that she was a burden, a mistake, a problem to be endured. But hearing it said out loud, in front of strangers, with Jonah standing right there and not denying it, she turned and walked out of the store. Behind her, she heard Jonah say something harsh and low, heard Vanessa laugh again, but she didn't stop. She walked to the wagon, climbed onto the seat, and sat there staring at her hands while the whole town whispered about the unwanted bride who'd finally realized she should have stayed away. A few minutes later, Jonah emerged from the store carrying the last of the supplies. He loaded them in silence, then climbed onto the wagon seat beside her. They rode out of town without a word. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Mara kept her eyes on the road ahead, refusing to let the tears building behind her eyes fall. She wouldn't give anyone that satisfaction. They were halfway home when Jonah finally spoke. "Vanessa Burke is a viper," he said flatly. "Has been since we were children. She wanted the ranch, not me. When I wouldn't marry her, she married Thomas Burke and has spent the last 3 years making sure everyone knows what a mistake I made." Mara said nothing. "The things she said in there, they're not true, aren't they?" Mara's voice came out rougher than she'd intended. "I was sent here as a joke. You didn't choose me. You've made it clear every single day that I'm a problem you're trying to solve. She didn't say anything that isn't accurate." Jonah's hands tightened on the rein. "You think I care what Vanessa Burke thinks? What any of them think?" "I think," Mara said carefully, "that you're a man who sent for a bride he expected to want and got stuck with one he doesn't. I think every day I'm here is a reminder of that. And I think..." She stopped, swallowed hard. "I think I'm tired of pretending that's not true." The wagon rolled on. The ranch came into view in the distance, small and solid against the endless sky. "You're right," Jonah said finally. "I didn't choose you. I wanted someone else, someone I thought would be easier, more suitable, more..." He stopped. "But here's what Vanessa doesn't understand. What none of them understand. You've been here 10 days and you haven't complained once, haven't asked for special treatment, haven't done anything except work harder than most men I've hired. So no, I didn't choose you, but that doesn't mean you're a mistake. It wasn't a declaration of affection. It wasn't even particularly kind, but it was honest, and coming from Jonah Reed, honesty might be worth more than kindness." "Thank you," Mara said quietly. They didn't speak again until they reached the ranch. That night, Mara lay in her narrow bed and listened to the wind howl across the prairie. She thought about Vanessa Burke's beautiful, cruel face, about Mrs. Patterson's sneer, about her father's laugh when he told her she was going to Wyoming to marry a stranger. And she thought about Jonah saying, "That doesn't mean you're a mistake." It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, something would have to be enough. The days after the incident in Sage Creek fell into a rhythm that was somehow both easier and harder than before. Easier because Jonah had acknowledged her existence beyond simple utility, had defended her in his own blunt way. Harder because the walls of silence between them had grown higher, thicker, as if that moment of honesty had cost him something he wasn't willing to pay again. Mara didn't push. She'd learned early in life that pushing got you nowhere except further into the cold. The garden was nearly finished now. 3 weeks of backbreaking work had transformed the weed-choked plot into turned earth ready for spring planting. Her hands were a map of scars and calluses, her shoulders permanently tight from the repetitive motion of the shovel. But when she stood at the edge of the garden in the early morning light, she felt something close to pride. She'd done this, alone, without complaint. Jonah had noticed. She'd caught him standing at the kitchen window yesterday, coffee cup in hand, staring out at the neat rows of turned soil. He hadn't said anything, but when she'd come inside for lunch, there'd been a new pair of work gloves on the table. Good leather ones, not the worn-out pair she'd been using. He'd been gone by the time she picked them up, but the message was clear enough. On the 23rd day of her residence at Iron Hollow Ranch, Mara woke to a different kind of silence. Not the usual pre-dawn quiet, but something heavier, more expectant. She dressed quickly and emerged from her room to find Jonah already at the stove, but his movements were tight, controlled in a way that spoke of tension. "Storm coming," he said without preamble. "Big one, by the look of the sky. We need to get the cattle moved to the south pasture before it hits. There's shelter there, timber breaks, and a ravine they can hunker down in." Mara looked out the window. The sky was still dark, but there was a greenish tint to the clouds on the western horizon that made her skin prickle with instinctive unease. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Few hours, maybe less. Depends on how fast it moves." He set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. "Eat fast. We leave in 10 minutes." They rode out as the first real light touched the eastern sky, and Mara could feel the change in the air, a heaviness, a charge that made the horses skittish and nervous. The wind had picked up, blowing in erratic gusts that carried the smell of rain and something else, something wild and dangerous. The cattle were scattered across the north pasture, grazing peacefully, completely unaware of what was coming. Jonah circled wide to the left, and Mara instinctively moved right, understanding without being told that they needed to push the herd south. "Easy," Jonah called across the distance. "Don't spook them. Steady pressure. Keep them moving together." Mara urged the sorrel mare forward, using her presence to encourage the nearest cattle to start drifting south. It was slow work. The cows were reluctant to move, comfortable where they were, and kept trying to break away and return to their grazing. But gradually, with Jonah pushing from one side and Mara from the other, they got the herd moving in the right direction. The sky was growing darker by the minute, the green tint spreading like a bruise. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and ominous. "Faster!" Jonah shouted. The calm control in his voice had fractured into urgency. "We need to move faster!" Mara pushed the mare harder, calling out to the cattle, slapping her rope against her leg to create noise and movement. The herd started moving at a quicker pace, but it still wasn't fast enough. The storm was coming too quickly, the sky darkening to an unnatural twilight, even though it couldn't be later than 8 in the morning. They were still half a mile from the south pasture when the first drops of rain hit, huge, heavy drops that struck like stones. Within seconds, it became a deluge, rain so thick Mara could barely see Jonah through the sheets of water. "Keep moving!" His voice cut through the roar of the storm. "Don't let them scatter!" The cattle were panicking now, trying to break and run in every direction. Mara rode hard, cutting off the ones that tried to bolt, forcing them back toward the herd, even as the rain soaked through her clothes and the wind tried to tear her from the saddle. The mare beneath her was frightened but steady, responding to Mara's commands even as lightning split the sky and thunder crashed so loud it felt like the earth itself was breaking apart. Mara had never been so terrified in her life, but she didn't run, didn't freeze. She stayed in the saddle, stayed focused on the cattle, stayed committed to the task even as every instinct screamed at her to seek shelter. Through the rain, she could see Jonah doing the same, a dark figure on horseback, relentless and unmovable, refusing to let the storm win. It took another 20 minutes to get the herd to the south pasture, 20 minutes that felt like hours. By the time the last cow reached the shelter of the timber break, Mara was shaking with exhaustion and cold, her hands so numb she could barely feel the reins. Jonah rode up beside her, his face streaming with water, his eyes fierce. "You all right?" "Yes," Mara gasped. Good. Stay here with them. Make sure none of them bolt. I'm going to check the fence line. If it's down, they'll scatter and we'll lose them. Jonah? The wind tore his name from her mouth. It's not safe. Nothing about this is safe, he shouted back. But if we lose these cattle, we lose everything. Just stay here and keep them calm. Then he was gone, disappearing into the rain like a ghost. Mara sat on the trembling mare, watching the dark shapes of the cattle huddling together in the ravine. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the landscape in brief, stark moments of clarity. The bent grass, the thrashing trees, the vast emptiness of the prairie under assault from the sky. She'd never felt so small. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The rain didn't let up, and the wind only grew stronger, howling across the open land with a sound like fury. Jonah didn't come back. Mara stared into the storm, her heart pounding. Something was wrong. He'd been gone too long. The fence line wasn't that far. He should have been back by now. She looked at the cattle still huddled and holding position. Then she looked out into the storm, into the direction Jonah had gone. Every reasonable instinct told her to stay put, to follow his orders, to wait. But Mara had spent her entire life being reasonable, being obedient, doing what she was told. And where had it gotten her? Sent away like trash, treated like a burden, made to feel like her very existence was an imposition. She was done being reasonable. She turned the mare into the storm and rode. The wind fought her every step, trying to push her back, trying to throw her from the saddle. Rain lashed her face until her skin burned. She could barely see 10 feet in front of her, could barely hear anything over the roar of the storm. But she kept riding, following the fence line south, trusting her instincts and the mare's sure feet. She almost missed him. It was a flash of lightning that revealed the scene. Jonah's gray gelding standing riderless near a section of downed fence, and Jonah himself on the ground, pinned under a fallen tree branch that must have been torn loose by the wind. Mara was off her horse before she fully registered what she was doing. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands frantically checking for blood, for broken bones, for signs of serious injury. Jonah, can you hear me? He opened his eyes, his face twisted with pain. What the hell are you doing here? I told you to stay with the cattle. The cattle are fine, you're not. She grabbed the branch, tried to lift it, but it was too heavy, too waterlogged. It didn't budge. Can you move? Is anything broken? Legs pinned, he gritted out. Been trying to shift it, but I can't get leverage. Mara, you need to go back. I'm not leaving you here. This branch is too heavy for you to lift. Then I'll dig you out from under it. She grabbed handfuls of mud and started scooping it away from where his leg was trapped, creating a depression that might give him enough room to pull free. Her hands slipped in the wet earth, her fingers scraped against hidden rocks. But she didn't stop, didn't slow down. Jonah stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Mara, this is insane. Yes, she agreed breathlessly, still digging. It is. Now shut up and help me. Can you push up on the branch while I dig, even a little? He set his jaw, braced his hands against the rough bark, and pushed. The branch lifted perhaps an inch, maybe 2. Mara dug faster, throwing mud aside in desperate handfuls, carving out space beneath his trapped leg. Again, she commanded. Push again. Jonah pushed, his face going white with effort. The branch shifted slightly. Now pull. Mara grabbed his shoulders, adding her strength to his, and together they dragged him backward through the mud. His leg came free with a horrible scraping sound, and Jonah let out a sharp grunt of pain, but he was free. Mara helped him sit up, her hands still shaking. Is it broken? Don't think so. He tested the leg carefully, wincing. Bruised to hell. Might not walk right for a few days, but... He looked up at her, rain streaming down his face. You should have stayed with the cattle. The cattle are fine, Mara repeated. She was suddenly, irrationally angry. But you could have died out here. That branch could have crushed you. The storm could have gotten worse. And what was I supposed to do, just wait at the ravine and hope you came back? That's exactly what you were supposed to do. Why? She demanded. Because you said so? Because I'm supposed to be obedient and follow orders and not cause trouble? She stood up, glaring down at him. I'm already the unwanted bride, the mistake, the woman who wasn't good enough to choose. If I'm going to be all those things anyway, I might as well be the woman who doesn't let people die in storms because they're too stubborn to accept help. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating her face, mud-streaked, furious, defiant. Jonah stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound, more like disbelief mixed with exhaustion, but it was genuine. He shook his head, still laughing, and pushed himself to his feet with obvious pain. "You're completely out of your mind," he said. "Probably," Mara agreed. "Could have gotten yourself killed riding out here." Could have. Didn't. He took a step toward her, limping badly, and for a moment Mara thought he might actually yell at her again. Instead, he reached out and gripped her shoulder, hard enough that she felt it through her soaked coat. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have come, but thank you." Then he let go, turned to his horse, and somehow managed to haul himself into the saddle despite his injured leg. "Let's get back to the cattle," he said. "The storm's not done with us yet." They rode back together, side by side through the rain and wind, and something between them had shifted in a way Mara couldn't quite name. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even necessarily kindness. But it was acknowledgement of her presence, her choice, her refusal to simply disappear into the background of his life. The cattle were still holding position in the ravine when they returned, and the storm finally began to ease as the afternoon wore on. By evening, it had passed completely, leaving behind a world that looked scoured clean, the prairie grass beaten flat, and the sky washed pale blue. They rode home in exhausted silence, both soaked to the bone and shivering with cold. At the barn, Jonah could barely dismount. His leg had stiffened during the ride, and when his feet hit the ground, he nearly collapsed. Mara was beside him instantly, ducking under his arm to take some of his weight. "Lean on me. I'm too heavy." I said, "Lean on me." He did, and together they made their way to the house. Mara helped him inside, helped him into a chair by the fire, and immediately began building up the flames to drive back the cold. "I can do that," Jonah protested weakly. "You can sit there and not argue," Mara countered. She got the fire roaring, then disappeared into his room and returned with dry clothes. "Change. I'll make coffee." By the time she came back with 2 steaming cups, Jonah had changed into dry pants and a clean shirt, though the effort had clearly cost him. His face was tight with pain, and he couldn't quite hide the way his hands trembled. Mara handed him the coffee and sat down across from him. They drank in silence, the warmth slowly seeping back into their bodies. "That was the worst storm I've seen in 3 years, Jonah said finally. "Could have lost the entire herd if they'd scattered. But we didn't." "No, we didn't." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You saved them, and you saved me." "We saved each other," Mara corrected quietly. "You taught me how to handle the cattle. I wouldn't have known what to do if you hadn't." Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My mother used to say that the prairie shows you who people really are. It strips away all the pretense, all the lies we tell ourselves. Out here, you can't hide." He paused. "I didn't want you here. Didn't want a reminder of my own stupid hope that maybe I could have something normal, something that wasn't defined by this ranch and this work. But what I wanted doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that you rode into a storm to pull me out from under a tree. And that takes more courage than I've seen in most men." Mara felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Good. You should have been. Only fools aren't afraid of storms like that." "Then what does it say about you, riding off to check fence lines in the middle of it?" A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "That I'm a fool, but we already established that." They finished their coffee as darkness fell outside, and for the first time since Mara had arrived at Iron Hollow Ranch, the silence between them felt almost comfortable. The next morning, Jonah could barely walk. His leg was swollen and bruised from hip to ankle, the skin mottled purple and black. He tried to hide it, tried to act like everything was normal, but when Mara came into the kitchen, she found him gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles, his face gray with pain. "You're not riding today," she said flatly. "The cattle need checking. The storm might have—" "I'll check them." Jonah looked up at her, startled. "Alone?" "You taught me what to look for. I know the pastures. I know the count. I know how to spot problems. And you can barely stand." She poured coffee, set it in front of him. "Trust me to do this." He stared at her for a long moment, something warring behind his eyes. Finally, he gave a short nod. South pasture first. Make sure the fence held through the night. Count the herd. Should still be 43. Check for injuries, anything that looks wrong. If you find trouble you can't handle, come back and get me." "I will." "Mara." He waited until she looked at him. "Be careful. The prairie's dangerous on a good day. After a storm like that, it's worse." "I know," she said gently. "I'll be careful." She rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, the sorrel mare fresh and eager despite yesterday's ordeal. The land looked different after the storm, cleaned somehow, the colors sharper, the air so clear she felt like she could see all the way to the mountains. The south pasture fence had held, though several posts were leaning and would need reinforcement. Mara made a mental note and continued on to where the cattle should be. She found them still huddled in the ravine, 43 head, all accounted for. She counted twice to be sure, then rode slowly through them, checking for signs of injury or distress. Most were fine, but one young heifer had a gash on her shoulder, probably from being pushed against something sharp during the panic of the storm. Mara dismounted and approached slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice. The heifer eyed her nervously, but didn't bolt. Mara got close enough to examine the wound. Not deep, but it would need cleaning to prevent infection. She didn't have supplies with her to treat it now, but she could bring them tomorrow. She made another mental note, filed it away with the fence posts that needed attention. By the time she rode back to the ranch, it was late morning. Jonah was on the porch, clearly having dragged himself outside to watch for her return. The relief on his face when he saw her was quickly masked, but not quickly enough. "Well?" he asked as she dismounted. 43 head, all present. Most of them fine, but there's one heifer with a shoulder wound that needs cleaning. Fence held, but there are 3 posts that should be reinforced. She tied the mare to the rail and climbed the porch steps. "I can handle the fence work this afternoon if you tell me what needs doing." Jonah studied her with an expression she was starting to recognize, surprise mixed with something that might have been respect. "You did good." "Thank you. I mean it. Most ranch hands I've hired couldn't have given me that clear a report." Mara felt warmth bloom in her chest, completely disproportionate to the simple compliment. "Well, I'm not most ranch hands." "No," Jonah agreed quietly. "You're really not." Over the next week, as Jonah's leg slowly healed, Mara took over more of the daily ranch work. She rode fence lines alone, checked on cattle, repaired the storm damage to the barn roof where the wind had torn off several shingles. Jonah gave her instructions, trusted her to carry them out, and stopped hovering over her shoulder to make sure she did things right. It was the closest thing to freedom Mara had ever experienced, but freedom on the frontier came with a price, and Mara was about to discover exactly how high that price could be. On the 8th day after the storm, Mara rode into Sage Creek to pick up supplies. Jonah had given her a list and money, trusting her to handle the transaction alone while he stayed home to rest his still healing leg. The moment she walked into Patterson's general store, she knew it was a mistake. Mrs. Patterson looked up from behind the counter, her expression shifting from surprise to something cold and calculating. "Well, well, the mail order bride. Alone today?" "Mr. Reed is recovering from an injury," Mara said evenly. "I'm here to pick up supplies." "An injury? How convenient!" Mrs. Patterson's voice dripped with false sympathy. "I suppose a man might injure himself if he's not careful about the company he keeps." Mara set the list on the counter, refusing to take the bait. 20 pounds of flour, 10 pounds of coffee, sugar, salt, and beans. Also thread and needles if you have them. Mrs. Patterson made no move to fill the order. Instead, she leaned against the counter, her eyes traveling over Mara with undisguised contempt. "You know, we've all been talking about you and Jonah Reed living out there alone, unmarried. It's not decent. It's not proper." "We're not unmarried," Mara said quietly. "There was a contract. I fulfilled it." "A contract? Without a ceremony? Without witnesses or a proper wedding?" Mrs. Patterson laughed sharply. "That's not a marriage, girl. That's something else entirely. And people are starting to wonder what kind of woman would live with a man under those circumstances." The words hit their mark, and Mara felt her face flush. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "The kind of woman who works harder than most men in this town." Mara turned to find an older woman standing in the doorway, 60-something, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She wore simple but well-made clothes and carried herself with the authority of someone who had earned respect through decades of hard living. "Mrs. Hartley," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice suddenly uncertain. "I didn't hear you come in." Clearly, the older woman moved to stand beside Mara, her presence somehow protective. "I was at the Johnsons' place after the storm, helping with their injured boy. I rode past Iron Hollow on my way back." She looked directly at Mrs. Patterson. "I saw this young woman on the roof of the barn, replacing shingles in weather that would make most men think twice. Saw her riding fence lines, working cattle, doing the kind of labor that built this territory." She paused. "So before you stand there in your clean store and question her character, Clara Patterson, maybe ask yourself what you've done lately that required even half that much courage." Mrs. Patterson's face went red, then white. You were just running your mouth like always. Now fill the girl's order and keep your opinions to yourself." The store had gone absolutely silent. Every customer was staring, but Mrs. Patterson had no choice except to comply. She measured out the supplies with jerky, angry movements, slapping them onto the counter with barely restrained hostility. Mara paid, her hands shaking slightly, and Mrs. Hartley helped her carry the supplies to the wagon. "Thank you," Mara said quietly once they were outside. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Mrs. Hartley fixed her with a steady gaze. "I've lived in this territory for 40 years, child. I know what it takes to survive here, and I know quality when I see it. You've got steel in you. Don't let small-minded fools like Clara Patterson make you forget that." They think, Mara swallowed hard, "they think I'm living in sin, that Jonah and I aren't properly married." "Are you?" The blunt question caught Mara off guard. I don't know. There was a contract but no ceremony. I came here to be his bride, but he never asked me to be his wife. We just exist together." Mrs. Hartley nodded slowly. "That's a complicated situation. But here's what I know. Jonah Reed is a good man who's had more than his share of heartbreak. His mother's death nearly destroyed him, and he's been holding that ranch together through sheer stubbornness ever since. If he's letting you stay, if he's trusting you with the work, that means something. Whether it's a marriage in the eyes of the law or not, it's a partnership. And out here, partnership might matter more than any ceremony." She paused, then added gently, "But if the talk bothers you, if you want to make it official, you could suggest it. Might give you both some peace of mind." Mara thought about that on the long ride home, about what it would mean to ask Jonah to marry her properly, to make their arrangement something more than convenient labor, about whether she even wanted that, or if she was just tired of being judged. She was still thinking about it when she arrived back at the ranch to find a strange horse tied to the porch rail. Mara's heart sank. Visitors meant complications, and she'd had enough complications for one day. She carried the supplies inside and found Jonah sitting at the table across from a man she'd never seen before. Middle-aged, well-dressed, with the soft hands and calculating eyes of someone who made his living with words rather than work. Both men looked up when she entered. "Mara," Jonah said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is Lawrence Brennan. He's a lawyer from Cheyenne." The lawyer stood, offering a slight bow. "Miss Wells, a pleasure." "Mrs. Reed," Jonah corrected sharply, and Mara felt something flutter in her chest at the possessive edge in his voice. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Reed." Brennan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though that's actually what I've come to discuss. I represent a concerned party who has questions about the legality of your marriage." Mara set down the supplies very carefully, her mind racing. "What concerned party?" "I'm not at liberty to say, but they've brought to my attention that you and Mr. Reed are living together without benefit of a legal ceremony, that there are questions about the validity of your marriage contract, and that—" He pulled out a document from his leather case. "That there may be grounds for annulment based on fraud and misrepresentation." The room went very cold. "Get out," Jonah said quietly. "Mr. Reed, I understand you're upset, but I said get out." Jonah stood, his injured leg making him unsteady, but his voice absolutely steady. "This is my land, my house, and my wife. Whatever legal nonsense you're selling, I'm not buying." "The law doesn't require your cooperation," Brennan said smoothly. If there are questions about the legitimacy of this union, they can be raised in court. And given the circumstances, a woman sent in place of her sister, no formal ceremony, questions about consent and propriety, I think you'll find that a judge might have significant concerns. Mara felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Someone was trying to destroy what little she'd built here. Someone wanted her gone badly enough to hire a lawyer and manufacture legal complications. And she had a terrible suspicion she knew exactly who that someone was. "Vanessa Burke sent you," she said flatly. Brennan's expression flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. "Mrs. Burke is a concerned citizen who—" "Mrs. Burke is a vindictive snake who can't stand that Jonah chose someone else," Mara interrupted. "This has nothing to do with law or propriety. This is about humiliation and control." "Nevertheless," Brennan continued, "the questions remain. And unless you can provide proof of a legal marriage, a ceremony, witnesses, proper documentation, then I'm afraid the court may rule that this arrangement is illegitimate and order Miss Wells to leave the territory." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Jonah crossed the room in 3 limping strides, grabbed Brennan by his expensive coat, and physically hauled him toward the door. "I gave you a chance to leave on your own feet," Jonah said, his voice deadly calm. "But since you don't seem to understand plain English, let me make this crystal clear. Mara Wells is my wife. The fact that we haven't had a formal ceremony doesn't change that. She came here under a legitimate contract, she's worked this ranch alongside me, and she's earned every right to be here. So you can take your legal threats and your concerned parties and get the hell off my land before I help you off." He shoved Brennan out the door. The lawyer stumbled, caught himself, and turned back with fury in his eyes. "You're making a mistake, Reed. This won't go away just because you don't like it." "Then let it come," Jonah said. "But it'll have to go through me first." Brennan climbed onto his horse, cast one last venomous look at Mara standing in the doorway, and rode off toward town. Jonah stood there for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists, his whole body vibrating with suppressed rage. Then he turned and looked at Mara. "We need to fix this," he said. "How?" "We get married, properly, with a ceremony and witnesses and whatever legal documentation that bastard needs to see." He moved closer, his gray eyes intense. "I won't let Vanessa Burke or anyone else take this from you, from us." Mara's throat tightened. "Jonah, I know this isn't how it should be. I know you deserve better than a marriage born out of legal necessity, but it's what we've got." He paused. "Unless you want to leave. If you want to go back east, get away from all this mess, I'll give you money for passage and enough to start over somewhere else. I won't trap you here." "Do you want me to leave?" Mara asked quietly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He stared at her for a long moment, something complicated moving through his expression. "No," he said finally. "I don't." "Then I'm not leaving." Mara straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin. "And if we need to get married to make it legal, to protect what we've built here, then that's what we'll do." Jonah nodded slowly. "All right then. I'll ride into town tomorrow, talk to the minister. We can do it simple. No fuss, just the legal requirements." "All right." They stood there in the doorway, the Wyoming wind blowing around them, and Mara realized that everything was about to change again. They were going to get married, really married, and she had no idea what that would mean for either of them. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't going to let Vanessa Burke or anyone else drive her away from the first place she'd ever felt like she belonged. Even if that belonging was complicated, conditional, and built on a foundation of necessity rather than love. It would have to be enough. The wedding was scheduled for 3 days later, which gave Mara exactly 72 hours to come to terms with the fact that she was about to marry a man who had never once said he cared for her, who had made it abundantly clear that this was a legal formality and nothing more, and who still looked at her sometimes like he was trying to figure out how she'd ended up in his life. She spent those 3 days working. It was the only thing that made sense, the only thing that kept her hands busy and her mind from spinning in circles. She finished reinforcing the fence posts in the south pasture, treated the injured heifer's wound until it started healing clean, and began the long process of preparing the garden for spring planting even though the ground was still half frozen. Jonah watched her with increasing frustration. "You don't have to work yourself to death before the ceremony," he said on the second day, finding her hauling water from the well to the garden in the late afternoon cold. I'm not working myself to death. I'm working. Mara. He took the bucket from her hands, his grip firm. Stop. Just for a minute. Stop. She stopped, breathing hard from the exertion, and looked at him. His expression was complicated, concern mixed with something that might have been guilt. This isn't what you signed up for, he said quietly. Coming out here to marry a stranger is one thing. Being forced into a legal marriage because some vindictive woman wants to humiliate both of us. That's something else entirely. I know what I'm doing, Mara said. Do you? Because I'm not sure I do. He set the bucket down, ran a hand through his hair. I keep thinking about what you said that day in Sage Creek, that you're tired of pretending this isn't what it is. Well, what is it, Mara? What are we doing here? It was the most direct question he'd ever asked her, and Mara didn't have a good answer. What were they doing? Building a partnership? Creating a marriage of convenience? Simply surviving side by side until one of them broke? I don't know, she admitted, but I know I'm not leaving, and I know that whatever this is, it's more honest than anything I had back in Philadelphia. At least here, I know where I stand. Do you? Jonah's voice was rough. Because I'm not sure I've made that clear. You work harder than any man I've ever hired. You saved my life in that storm. You've earned your place here 10 times over, and He stopped, something working behind his eyes. I don't want you here because of a legal obligation, or because Vanessa Burke is trying to cause trouble. I want you here because you belong here. The words hung in the cold air between them, more intimate than anything he'd said before. Then that's what this is, Mara said softly. A choice. We're choosing this. Choosing each other, even if it's not for the reasons most people choose. Jonah nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his face. All right, then let's do this properly. Not just the legal part, the rest of it too. What do you mean? I mean, he pulled something from his pocket, and Mara's breath caught when she saw what it was. A ring. Simple gold, slightly worn, with a small stone that caught the fading sunlight. This was my mother's. She'd want you to have it, if you'll wear it. Mara stared at the ring, her throat tight. It wasn't a proposal born of love or romance, but it was real, offered with sincerity, and coming from Jonah Reed, that might be worth more than pretty words. Yes, she said, I'll wear it. He took her hand, rough from work, scarred from the garden, nothing delicate about it, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. They stood there in the dying light, holding hands like awkward teenagers, and Mara felt something shift in her chest. This was happening. This was real. In 3 days, she would stand in front of witnesses and promise to spend her life with this complicated, damaged, occasionally infuriating man. And she wasn't afraid. The ceremony took place in the small church in Sage Creek, with Reverend Matthews officiating and exactly 4 witnesses present, Mrs. Hartley, who had insisted on attending, the Reverend's wife, and 2 ranch hands from a neighboring property that Jonah had known for years. Vanessa Burke was notably absent, though Mara had no doubt she'd hear about every detail within hours. Mara wore her best dress, dark blue wool, simple but well made, the only nice thing she'd brought from Philadelphia. She'd pinned up her hair and even allowed Mrs. Hartley to weave in a few sprigs of dried lavender from the older woman's garden. Jonah wore clean clothes and had actually shaved, which made him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. When Mara walked down the short aisle to stand beside him, she saw his hands tighten at his sides, saw the muscle jump in his jaw. Nervous. He was nervous. Somehow that made everything feel more real. Reverend Matthews was a practical man who understood frontier marriages and didn't waste time on lengthy sermons. He spoke about partnership and endurance, about the kind of commitment required to build a life in harsh country, about choosing each other every day, even when, especially when, things got hard. Marriage on the frontier isn't a fairy tale, he said, looking at both of them with kind but unflinching eyes. It's work. It's choosing to stand beside someone in the bad times as well as the good. It's trust built through shared hardship, and it's worth more than all the romantic notions people bring from back east. He paused. Jonah Reed, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to stand beside her in storm and drought, in plenty and in want, for as long as you both shall live? "I do," Jonah said, his voice steady. "Mara Wells, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to stand beside him in storm and drought, in plenty and in want, for as long as you both shall live?" Mara looked at Jonah, really looked at him, at the man who had given her work when he could have sent her away, who had trusted her with his ranch and his mother's ring, who was choosing her now, even though she wasn't what he'd wanted. "I do," she said clearly. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Matthews smiled. "You may kiss your bride, Jonah." For a moment, Jonah looked completely panicked. Then he leaned down and pressed a quick, awkward kiss to Mara's lips, barely more than a brush of contact, over before she could even register it. But it was enough to make it official. They signed the marriage certificate with Mrs. Hartley and the ranch hands as witnesses, and just like that, Mara Wells became Mara Reed, a real wife, a legal wife, someone who belonged, at least on paper. The small reception afterward was brief: coffee and cake in the church hall, polite conversation, congratulations that felt sincere from Mrs. Hartley and perfunctory from everyone else. Mara caught whispers in the corners, saw the speculative looks, heard the careful questions about whether this had all been rather sudden. Let them whisper. She had a marriage certificate and a gold ring, and a man who'd stood beside her in front of witnesses and chosen her publicly. That was more than she'd ever expected to have. They rode home in this late afternoon, the winter sun already sinking toward the mountains. Jonah was quiet, his hands loose on the reins, his expression distant. Mara wondered what he was thinking, whether he regretted this already, whether the reality of being legally bound to her was settling in like a weight. "You're quiet," she said finally. "Thinking. About? About how Vanessa's going to react when she hears, about whether Brennan will actually drop this, or if he'll find some other legal angle." He glanced at her. "About whether you're all right." "I'm fine," Mara said. "You shouldn't have to be just fine on your wedding day." "I'm better than fine then. I'm married to a man who treats me like an equal partner, who trusts me with his ranch, who gave me his mother's ring." She looked down at the band on her finger, the small stone catching the light. "That's more than most women get." Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My mother would have liked you. She was tough like you, didn't take any nonsense, worked harder than most men, kept this ranch running even when my father got sick and couldn't work anymore." His voice softened. "The day she died, she made me promise I wouldn't let the ranch fall apart, wouldn't let loneliness turn me bitter. I think she knew I was heading that direction." "You're not bitter," Mara said. "I was getting there, before you came." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You changed that, changed a lot of things." "So did you," Mara said quietly. "I came here thinking I was worthless, that I'd been sent away because I was too much trouble to keep. You never treated me like that. You gave me work, gave me purpose, made me feel like I could be more than just the daughter nobody wanted. You are more than that. You always were." The words settled between them like a promise, and Mara felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to cry on her wedding day, refusing to show that kind of vulnerability. They reached the ranch as darkness fell, and Jonah helped her down from the wagon with careful formality. They'd never discussed the sleeping arrangements, and Mara suddenly realized she had no idea what came next. Would he expect her to move into his room? Would things change between them now that they were legally married? But Jonah just carried the supplies inside, built up the fire against the cold, and said, "I'll make dinner. You must be tired." So apparently nothing was changing after all. Mara helped anyway, because sitting still felt impossible. They worked together in the kitchen, falling into the familiar rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks. Jonah at the stove, Mara setting the table, both of them moving around each other with practiced ease. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward Jonah washed the dishes while Mara dried and put them away. Domestic, familiar. Nothing at all like a wedding night, but somehow that felt right for them. "Mara," Jonah said as she hung up the dish towel, "I know this isn't a conventional marriage. I know we're not—" He stopped, searching for words. "I don't expect anything from you tonight, or any night, not until you're ready. If you're ever ready." Mara's face flushed. "Oh, Thank you for being clear about that. I just want you to feel safe here, to know you have a choice. I know, Mara said softly. I've always known that. Even when you were angry about me being here, even when you made it clear I wasn't what you wanted, you never made me feel unsafe. That matters more than you probably realize. Jonah nodded, looking uncomfortable with the gratitude. Well, I'm going to check on the horses. You should get some rest. He left before she could respond, and Mara stood alone in the kitchen, her mother's Bible and her new marriage certificate sitting side by side on the table, proof that her life had changed irrevocably in the space of a few hours. She went to her room, still her room, apparently, and changed into her nightgown. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jonah moving around the house, his footsteps heavy and familiar. Eventually, she heard his bedroom door close, heard the creak of his bed as he settled in for the night. Mara lay in her own bed, the wedding ring feeling strange and precious on her finger, and wondered what came next. They were married now, legal and binding. But they were still essentially strangers, still learning each other's edges and boundaries, still figuring out what this partnership meant. She fell asleep still wondering, and woke to chaos. The sound that pulled her from sleep was animalistic and terrified, cattle lowing in distress, the thunder of hooves, shouting. Mara was out of bed and pulling on clothes before she fully registered what she was hearing. She burst out of her room to find Jonah already dressed, grabbing his rifle from the rack by the door. "What's happening?" she demanded. "Wolves," he said grimly. "Big pack from the sound of it. They're in the south pasture." Mara's blood went cold. The south pasture, where all 43 head of cattle had been moved for shelter after the storm. If the wolves scattered the herd in the dark, they could lose everything. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Mara, I'm coming with you." She grabbed her coat, pulled on her boots. "You can't handle a wolf pack alone, and we both know it. Now let's go." They ran to the barn together, saddled horses with frantic efficiency, and rode out into the freezing darkness. The moon was bright enough to see by, and the sounds of distress grew louder as they approached the south pasture. What they found was nightmare fuel. At least 6 wolves circled the herd, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like coins. The cattle were bunched together, terrified, trying to protect the calves in the center while the wolves darted in and out, testing for weakness. One young steer had already been separated, limping on an injured leg, while 2 wolves stalked it with patient hunger. "We have to break them up," Jonah shouted over the chaos. "Drive them away from the herd. Fire a shot over their heads. Don't hit them unless you have to, but make noise. Make them think we're a bigger threat than the cattle are worth." Mara pulled the rifle Jonah had given her from its saddle holster, her hands shaking. She'd never shot at anything living before, never even pointed a gun at something that could die. But those cattle were their livelihood, their survival, everything they'd fought to protect. She fired a shot into the air, the report cracking through the night like lightning. The wolves scattered momentarily, then regrouped, growling low and dangerous. They weren't afraid. They were hungry, and hunger made everything bold. Jonah rode hard toward the young steer, putting himself between it and the wolves, firing his own rifle to drive them back. Mara circled the other direction, keeping the main herd together, firing shots when the wolves got too close. For 20 minutes that felt like hours. They fought to keep the pack at bay. Mara's ears rang from the gunfire. Her arms ached from holding the rifle steady. Her throat was raw from shouting. But slowly, gradually, the wolves began to lose interest. The cost was getting too high, the prey too well defended. One by one, they melted back into the darkness, disappearing like ghosts into the prairie night. Jonah dismounted and approached the injured steer carefully. The animal was bleeding from claw marks on its hindquarters, but it was alive. It would need treatment, but it would survive. "We got lucky," Jonah said, breathing hard. "If there'd been more of them, or if they'd been more desperate." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Mara slid off her horse on shaking legs, the adrenaline finally draining away and leaving her hollow. "Is this normal? Do they attack often?" "Not usually. They tend to stay away from cattle that are well guarded. But it's been a hard winter. Food's scarce." He looked at her then, and his expression was complicated. "You shouldn't have come out here. It was too dangerous." "So was riding into a storm to check fence lines," Mara shot back. But you did it anyway. We're partners, Jonah. That means we face the dangerous things together. Something shifted in his face. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, and before Mara could react, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his heart pounding, could feel the tremor in his hands. "I thought they might get you," he said roughly into her hair. "Thought you might fall or get separated or—" He pulled back just enough to look at her, and his eyes were fierce. "Don't do that to me again. Don't make me watch you put yourself in danger." "Then don't put yourself in danger and expect me to just stand back and watch," Mara countered, her voice muffled against his coat. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other while the cattle settled and the night slowly returned to normal. Mara had never been held like this before, like she mattered, like the person holding her couldn't bear the thought of losing her. It felt like something breaking open inside her chest. "We should get back," Jonah said finally. But he didn't let go, not yet. "It'll be dawn soon. We'll need to treat that steer's injuries, make sure the rest of the herd is all right." "I know." "Mara." He waited until she looked up at him. "Thank you for coming out here with me, for being brave even when you were terrified. I saw your hands shaking." "I was terrified," Mara admitted, "but I wasn't going to let you face them alone." "That's what makes you remarkable," Jonah said quietly. "You're terrified, and you do it anyway." They rode back to the ranch as the sky began to lighten in the east, exhausted and cold but alive, together. The word kept echoing in Mara's mind. They'd faced the wolves together, just like they'd faced the storm together. Whatever this marriage was, it was real in the ways that mattered. They treated the injured steer as the sun rose, working side by side to clean the wounds and apply the salve Jonah kept for such emergencies. The animal would recover, though it would carry scars. Mara understood that feeling. By the time they finished, it was full morning, and Mara was swaying on her feet with exhaustion. Jonah noticed immediately, took her elbow, and guided her toward the house. "You need sleep," he said. "So do you." "I've gone without sleep before." "You're still recovering from—" He stopped. "From everything." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to prove she was strong enough to keep going, but her body had other ideas. The moment they stepped inside the house, her legs simply gave out. Jonah caught her before she hit the floor, scooped her up like she weighed nothing, and carried her to her room. He laid her gently on the bed, pulled the quilt up over her, and stood there looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Sleep," he said softly. "I'll handle things today. You've more than earned the rest." "Jonah?" She caught his hand before he could leave. "We're all right. The cattle are all right. We made it through." "We did." His fingers tightened around hers, together. Then he left, closing the door quietly behind him, and Mara fell into sleep still holding the warmth of his hand in her memory. She woke to the sound of a wagon approaching the house, the rattle of wheels and harness loud in the afternoon stillness. Mara sat up, disoriented, and realized she'd slept for hours. The sun was already past its peak. She dressed quickly and emerged from her room to find Jonah standing on the porch, his posture rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. The wagon had stopped in the yard, and a woman was climbing down with careful grace. Even before she turned around, Mara knew who it was. Lena Wells stepped into the afternoon sunlight, and the resemblance was both striking and painful. They had the same dark hair, the same basic bone structure. But where Mara was solid and practical, Lena was delicate and decorative. Where Mara's skin was tanned from outdoor work, Lena's was porcelain perfect. And where Mara's beauty was the kind that revealed itself slowly through character and strength, Lena's was immediate and undeniable. She was everything their father had always wanted Mara to be and never could. "Well," Lena said, looking around the ranch with barely concealed disdain, "so this is the place that was supposed to be mine." Mara stepped out onto the porch, and Lena's gaze swung to her. For a moment, something like surprise crossed her perfect features. "Mara, my goodness, you look absolutely ruined. What has this place done to you?" "It's given me a home," Mara said evenly. "What are you doing here, Lena?" "What do you think? I've come to collect what's mine." Lena turned to Jonah, her smile shifting into something calculated and charming. "You must be Jonah Reed. I'm Lena Wells, the woman you actually sent for." Jonah's expression didn't change. "I know who you are." "Then you know there's been a terrible misunderstanding. My father sent the wrong daughter. I'm sure Mara explained. But I'm here now and we can set things right." She moved closer to the porch, her movements deliberately graceful. "I apologize for the delay in my arrival, Mr. Reed, but surely you understand that a woman of refinement needs time to prepare for such a journey." "I don't need your apologies," Jonah said flatly, "and there's nothing to set right. Mara is my wife now, legally married. You're 3 months too late." Lena's smile faltered. "Married? To her?" She laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving. "You can't be serious. She was sent here as a joke, a punishment. You were supposed to send her back and wait for me." "I don't wait for people who think basic decency is beneath them," Jonah said. His voice was cold enough to freeze water. "And I don't break legal vows for women who show up expecting to be welcomed after making it clear they thought this ranch wasn't good enough for them. I never said—" "You didn't have to. Your father's letter made your feelings abundantly clear." Jonah stepped closer to Mara, his presence protective. "Now you can turn that wagon around and go back to Philadelphia, or wherever else you came from. There's nothing for you here." Lena's face flushed with anger and humiliation. She looked at Mara with pure venom. "You did this on purpose, stole what should have been mine." "I didn't steal anything," Mara said quietly. "I was sent here against my will, just like you refused to come here by choice. The difference is I stayed, I worked, I earned my place. You just showed up expecting it to be handed to you." "Earned your place?" Lena's voice dripped with contempt. "Look at you. You look like a farmhand. Your hands are ruined, your face is sunburned, you've probably aged 10 years and 3 months. Is this what you call earning something? Destroying yourself for a man who only married you because I wasn't available?" The words hit their mark, and Mara felt something cold settle in her stomach. Because wasn't that the truth? Jonah had wanted Lena. He'd sent money for Lena. He'd planned a life with Lena in mind. Mara was just the substitute who'd happened to be durable enough to survive. But before the doubt could take root, Jonah spoke. "You're wrong," he said, his voice cutting through Lena's vitriol like a blade. "I married Mara because she's worth 10 of you. Because she stood beside me in a storm and saved my cattle. Because she rode into danger to pull me out from under a fallen tree. Because she faced down wolves in the darkness and didn't flinch. You think beauty and refinement matter out here? They don't. Strength matters. Character matters. And Mara has more of both than you could ever understand." The silence that followed was absolute. Lena stared at Jonah like he'd slapped her. Then her gaze swung to Mara, and what Mara saw there wasn't just anger anymore. It was jealousy, raw and unmistakable. "You really choose her," Lena said, her voice shaking. "Over me." "Yes," Jonah said simply. "I do." "Then you're both fools." Lena climbed back onto the wagon, her movements jerky with fury. "Enjoy your little frontier hovel and your tragic romance. I'm going back to civilization where people have standards." She snapped the reins and the wagon lurched into motion, carrying her back down the road toward town. Toward the east, toward a life Mara had left behind and no longer wanted. Jonah and Mara stood on the porch, watching until the wagon disappeared from view. Then Jonah turned to her, and his expression was raw in a way she'd never seen before. "I meant what I said," he told her, "every word of it." "I know," Mara said, her throat tight with emotion. "But she was right about one thing. You did want her first." I wanted the idea of her, an easy solution, someone refined who would make me look respectable. He reached out, cupped Mara's face in his rough, scarred hands. "But wanting an idea isn't the same as wanting a person. And what I want now, what I've wanted for weeks, even if I was too stubborn to admit it, is you. The real you. The woman who works until her hands bleed and never complains. The woman who faces down storms and wolves and vindictive lawyers without backing down. The woman who stands beside me like an equal instead of looking for someone to take care of her." Mara felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she didn't try to hide them. "I'm not easy to love." "Good," Jonah said fiercely. "Because I'm not either. But we don't have to be easy. We just have to be honest." He paused, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I'm choosing you, Mara. Not because you're here, not because it's convenient, but because you're you, and that's enough. That's more than enough. Then he kissed her, and it wasn't awkward or brief or perfunctory like their wedding kiss had been. It was real and deep and full of all the things neither of them had the words to say. Mara kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, gratitude and hope, and the beginning of something that might someday become love. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch looked beautiful in that light, harsh and unforgiving but also honest, a place where things were what they were without pretense. "Come on," Jonah said, taking her hand. "Let's go inside. We've got a lot to figure out, but we don't have to figure it all out tonight." Mara let him lead her into the house, into the life they were building together one difficult day at a time. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, it wasn't the life anyone would have chosen for her, but it was hers, earned through sweat and courage, and refusing to break when breaking would have been easier. And standing there in the doorway with Jonah's hand warm in hers, Mara realized something profound. She didn't need to be chosen first to matter. She just needed to be chosen honestly. And that was exactly what had happened. That night changed everything, though the changes came slowly, carefully, like frost forming on glass. Mara moved her things into Jonah's room piece by piece over the following week. Her clothes first, then her mother's Bible, finally her journal with its record of all the days she'd spent learning to belong. Jonah made space for her in the closet, cleared out a dresser drawer, moved his things to one side of the bed without comment or ceremony. They were building something together, and neither of them quite knew what to call it yet. The work continued as it always had, but now there was an ease between them that hadn't existed before. Jonah's instructions came with explanations now, teaching rather than simply directing. He showed her how to read the cattle's behavior, how to spot illness before it became critical, how to judge when to move the herd and when to let them be. Mara absorbed it all, asked questions, offered observations that sometimes made Jonah pause and reconsider his own assumptions. They were becoming partners in truth, not just in legal designation. But the world outside Iron Hollow Ranch wasn't ready to accept that quite so easily. 2 weeks after Lena's dramatic departure, Mara rode into Sage Creek for supplies and found the atmosphere in Patterson's store had shifted from hostile to something worse, pitying. Mrs. Patterson actually smiled at her, which was somehow more unsettling than her previous contempt. "Mrs. Reed," the woman said with saccharine sweetness, "how lovely to see you. I heard about your sister's visit. Such a shame that she came all this way only to find herself unwanted." Mara set her supply list on the counter and met Mrs. Patterson's gaze steadily. "My sister came expecting to walk into a situation she'd done nothing to earn. She left understanding that the world doesn't work that way. Still, it must have been difficult for you, seeing what your husband really wanted standing right there in front of him." Mrs. Patterson leaned closer, her voice dropping into false confidence. "Everyone knows he sent for her specifically. You were just the consolation prize, dear, the one he settled for." The words should have hurt. A month ago, they would have. But Mara had heard Jonah choose her over Lena in his own blunt, honest way, had felt his hands gentle on her face, had heard him say she was worth 10 of her sister. Words from strangers couldn't compete with that kind of certainty. "If being chosen honestly after proving myself is being a consolation prize," Mara said quietly, "then I'll take it over being wanted for my appearance and nothing else. Now, the supplies?" Mrs. Patterson's smile curdled, but she filled the order in tight-lipped silence. Mara paid, loaded the wagon, and was preparing to leave when she heard her name called across the street. "Mrs." Hartley was waving from in front of the seamstress shop, her expression warm and welcoming. Mara secured the supplies and crossed over to greet her. "I saw you dealing with Clara Patterson," the older woman said. "That woman has the temperament of a rattlesnake and half the charm. You handled her well." "She was trying to make me feel small," Mara said. "It didn't work." "Good. Don't let them do that to you." Mrs. Hartley paused, studying Mara's face with sharp eyes. "You look different than when I saw you at your wedding. Happier, maybe, or at least more settled." "I am," Mara admitted. "Things are better, clearer." "I'm glad to hear it. Jonah Reed deserves some happiness after everything he's been through, and so do you." She reached into her basket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. I brought you something, a wedding gift, though it's late. Mara unwrapped the package carefully and found a beautiful embroidered handkerchief, the edges worked in delicate blue thread that matched her wedding dress. But more precious was what lay beneath it, a small bundle of letters tied with ribbon. "Those are recipes," Mrs. Hartley explained, "from Jonah's mother. She and I were friends for 20 years, and she was always sharing her cooking secrets with me. I thought you might like to have them. Make the foods Jonah grew up with. Keep that connection alive." Mara's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you. This means more than you know." "You're welcome, dear. And Mara?" The older woman's voice softened. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve what you've built. I've seen a lot of marriages in my time, and most of them don't have half the foundation yours does. You and Jonah are building something real. That's worth protecting." Mara carried those words home along with the supplies and the precious bundle of recipes. That evening, she tried one, a beef stew with herbs and root vegetables, made the way Jonah's mother used to make it. When she served it to him at dinner, Jonah took one bite and went absolutely still. "Where did you get this recipe?" he asked, his voice rough. "Mrs. Hartley. She said your mother used to make it." Jonah set down his spoon, his eyes suspiciously bright. "She made this every Sunday in the winter. I haven't tasted it since—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "It's perfect, exactly how I remember it." They ate in silence, but it was the kind of silence that held meaning. Mara was learning the difference between the silences, the uncomfortable ones that meant distance and the peaceful ones that meant understanding. This was the latter, filled with gratitude and memory, and the beginning of something that felt like home. After dinner, Jonah pulled out a wooden box from the top shelf of the closet and brought it to the table. Inside were photographs, letters, small mementos from his past. He showed Mara pictures of his parents, his mother strong and capable, his father lean and weathered, told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about the hard years after his father got sick, about the day his mother died and how the silence in the house had nearly broken him. "I sent for a mail-order bride because I couldn't stand the quiet anymore," he admitted. "The ranch was running fine. I had work to keep me busy, but at night when I came back to this empty house," he shook his head, "I thought having someone here would fill that silence, make things easier." "And did it?" Mara asked softly. "No. You made things harder, actually." He smiled slightly at her startled expression. "You made me feel things again. Made me angry, made me frustrated, made me question what I thought I wanted. That's harder than being numb, but it's also better, real." Mara reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm glad I made things harder. So am I." That night, lying in the darkness with Jonah's arm around her waist and his breathing steady against her back, Mara felt something she hadn't felt since her mother died. Safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally protected. Like she'd found the one place in the world where she didn't have to pretend to be smaller, quieter, less than she was. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt less like survival and more like building. Spring was coming, the ground beginning to thaw, the first brave shoots of grass pushing through the winter-dead earth. Mara spent her mornings working in the garden, preparing it for planting, while Jonah handled the cattle and the endless fence repairs that came with changing seasons. But they worked together in the afternoons, and that's when Mara saw the ranch through different eyes. Jonah showed her the whole operation, the breeding program he was trying to build, the water management system that would determine their success or failure, the delicate balance of managing grazing land so it would sustain them for years to come. "This isn't just about surviving season to season," he explained one afternoon as they surveyed the north pasture. "It's about building something that lasts, something we can pass down." The casual way he said "we" made Mara's heart skip. He wasn't just talking about the ranch anymore. He was talking about a future that included both of them, working together, building together. "You're thinking about children," Mara said, the realization hitting her suddenly. Jonah's ears went red, but he didn't look away. "Eventually, if you want them. I know that we're still figuring things out between us, but yes, eventually I'd like this ranch to matter to someone beyond just me." "I'd like that too," Mara said quietly. "Not yet, but someday." The conversation settled something between them, an acknowledgement of the future they were building toward. It made the present feel more solid, more intentional, but the past wasn't done with them yet. Lawrence Brennan returned on a cold morning in early March, this time accompanied by two men Mara didn't recognize. Jonah saw them coming from the barn and his whole body went rigid with tension. "Stay inside," he told Mara. "No." "Mara, we face things together, remember? That's what you said." She followed him onto the porch, standing slightly behind his shoulder but clearly visible. Brennan dismounted with the same practiced ease as before. But there was something different in his demeanor now, less arrogance, more calculation. The two men with him were dressed in town clothes but carried themselves like they knew how to handle trouble. "Mr. Reed." "Mrs. Reed." Brennan's tone was professionally neutral. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I have official business to conduct." "Then conduct it and leave," Jonah said flatly. "I'm here on behalf of Samuel Wells of Philadelphia." Brennan pulled a document from his coat. "Mr. Wells has filed a legal complaint alleging fraud in the arrangement between yourself and his daughter, Mara. He claims that she was sent here without proper consent, that she's being held against her will, and that the marriage was conducted under duress." The words hung in the cold air like poison. "That's a lie," Mara said, her voice shaking with fury. "My father sent me here deliberately. He wanted to humiliate both of us. This has nothing to do with my welfare and everything to do with his pride being wounded. Nevertheless, Mrs. Reed, the complaint has been filed, and I am authorized by territorial law to investigate the circumstances." Brennan gestured to the two men behind him. "These gentlemen are witnesses. I need to speak with you privately, without your husband present, to verify that you're here of your own free will." "No," Jonah said immediately. "Mr. Reed, if you interfere with a legal investigation—" "I'm not interfering. I'm telling you that my wife has the right to refuse to speak with you, and if she chooses to answer your questions, she has the right to have me present." Brennan's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Reed, are you here of your own free will?" "Yes," Mara said clearly. "And your marriage to Mr. Reed, was it conducted with your full consent?" "Yes." "Without threats or coercion of any kind?" "Without threats or coercion," Mara confirmed. "I married Jonah Reed because I chose to, because we built something together worth protecting. My father doesn't get to decide my life anymore." One of the witnesses stepped forward, an older man with sharp eyes and a territorial marshal's badge on his coat. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Marshal Davies. I need you to understand that if there are concerns about your safety or well-being, we can provide protection. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to." "I know that," Mara said, "and I'm telling you clearly that I want to be here. This is my home. Jonah is my husband. My father sending lawyers to harass us doesn't change that." Marshal Davies studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Mr. Brennan, I've heard enough. Mrs. Reed is clearly here of her own volition. She's affirmed her consent to the marriage, and I see no evidence of duress or coercion. The complaint appears to be unfounded." "But Mr. Wells specifically stated—" "I don't care what Mr. Wells stated," the marshal interrupted. "I care about what I can verify with my own eyes and ears, and what I see is a woman who knows her own mind and made her own choices." He turned to Jonah. "You treat her well, Reed. I hear otherwise. I'll be back." "You won't hear otherwise," Jonah said. The marshal tipped his hat to Mara and remounted his horse. The second witness followed suit, clearly considering the matter closed. Brennan stood there for a moment longer, frustration evident in every line of his body. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Mr. Wells is a persistent man with considerable resources." "Then he can waste those resources all he wants," Mara said coldly. "I'm not going back to Philadelphia. I'm not leaving my husband. And you can tell my father that every legal maneuver he tries just proves what I already knew, that he never cared about me as a person. I was just a piece on his board to move around. Well, I'm off the board now, and I'm not coming back." Brennan's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. Then he turned and mounted his horse without another word. The three men rode away, leaving Jonah and Mara standing on the porch in the cold spring morning. Mara's hands were shaking. She'd confronted her father's power indirectly through his proxy, had stood up for herself and her choices in a way she'd never been able to do face to face. It felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Jonah pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. You were magnificent. I was terrified. Terrified and magnificent, like always. He pulled back enough to look at her, his expression serious. Your father's not going to stop. Men like him don't accept defeat easily. I know, but what else can he do? We're legally married. I've stated publicly that I'm here by choice. We have witnesses to our relationship. Mara shook her head. He has no power over me anymore. The only power he ever had was my willingness to accept his judgment of my worth. And I'm done accepting that. Then we'll face whatever comes next together, Jonah said firmly. But right now, we have a ranch to run and spring planning to prepare for. The work doesn't stop for family drama. They went back to work, but something had shifted. The threat from Mara's father, rather than driving a wedge between them, had solidified their partnership even further. They were united against outside forces, a team that couldn't be easily broken. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Jonah said quietly, I need to tell you something about Vanessa. Mara's hand stilled on the vegetables she was chopping. All right. We were engaged once, years ago, before my father got sick. Her family has money, owns the largest ranch in the territory. I thought... He stopped, choosing his words carefully. I thought marrying her would secure the future of this place, would give me the resources to expand, to make something bigger. What happened? My father got sick, needed constant care, expensive medicine. The ranch started struggling because I couldn't work it properly and take care of him at the same time. Vanessa's father came to me with an offer. He'd buy Iron Hollow outright, fold it into their operation, and I'd work for them as a foreman. Vanessa and I would still marry, but I'd be managing land that wasn't mine anymore. Mara could see where this was going. You refused. I refused. This land was my father's legacy, my mother's dream. Selling it would have destroyed them both. Vanessa didn't understand that, didn't understand why I'd choose a struggling ranch over financial security. His voice went flat. She called off the engagement, married Thomas Burke 6 months later. He has money and a ranch 3 times the size of mine. She got what she wanted. But she still comes around, Mara said, still tries to make you feel like you made a mistake. She wants me to regret it, wants me to look at what I could have had and feel like a failure. Jonah moved closer to Mara, his hand coming to rest on the small of her back. But I don't regret it. Not the choice to keep the ranch, and not the choice to marry you instead of waiting for someone like her. This place might be small, but it's honest. And so are you. Mara turned to face him fully, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. I'm glad you kept it. Glad you chose integrity over convenience. It's one of the things that makes you who you are. A stubborn fool? An honorable man, Mara corrected. There's a difference. They finished preparing dinner in comfortable silence, and later that night, lying in bed with the spring wind whistling around the house, Jonah traced patterns on Mara's shoulder and said, I think I'm falling in love with you. The words were hesitant, uncertain, like he was testing their weight in the darkness. Mara's heart stuttered in her chest. You think? I've never been good with feelings, never knew how to name them properly. But when I think about you leaving, about this house being empty again, about facing the work alone, it makes everything inside me go cold. And when I see you in the garden or working with the cattle or standing up to lawyers and your father's threats, I feel... He stopped, searching for the right words. Proud and grateful. And like maybe I don't have to do everything alone anymore. That sounds like love to me, Mara said softly. And for what it's worth, I think I'm falling in love with you too. The way you teach me things without making me feel stupid. The way you trust me with real work and real responsibility. The way you chose me over my beautiful sister without hesitation. The way you hold me at night like I'm something precious, even though I'm scarred and rough around the edges. You're not rough around the edges, Jonah said fiercely. You're real. That's different. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Mara dreamed of gardens growing and cattle thriving and a future that stretched out before them like the endless Wyoming sky. The next morning brought unexpected visitors, but for once, they were welcome ones. Mrs. Hartley arrived with 3 other women Mara recognized from town, their wagon loaded with supplies and their faces friendly. "We're here to help with spring planting," Mrs. Hartley announced. "It's tradition in these parts. Women help each other get their gardens started. You helped save Jonah's cattle during the storm, stood up to wolves and lawyers both. Time someone helped you." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been so focused on proving herself, on earning her place through solitary work, that she'd forgotten what it meant to be part of a community. The women worked together all day, turning soil, planning the garden layout, sharing seeds and advice and stories. They treated Mara like one of them, not the unwanted bride or the sister who wasn't good enough, but simply Mara Reed, a ranch wife who deserved support and friendship. When they finally left as the sun began to set, the garden was fully prepared for planting, and Mara had invitations to a quilting circle, a church social, and Sunday dinner at the Johnsons' ranch. Jonah found her standing in the garden afterward, looking at all they'd accomplished. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "You know that, right? You have me, and you have them. You've earned a place here that nobody can take away." Mara leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I know, for the first time in my life, I actually know that I belong somewhere." "You belong here," Jonah said. "With me. For as long as you want to stay." "Forever then," Mara said. "I want to stay forever." They stood there as darkness fell, two people who'd found each other through accident and necessity and had chosen to build something real from those unlikely foundations. The ranch spread around them, harsh and beautiful and home. Mara Wells Reed had been sent to Wyoming as a joke, a punishment, a cruel reminder that she wasn't good enough for the life her father had planned. But she'd turned that rejection into something powerful. She'd claimed a home, a husband, a future. She'd proven that being chosen second didn't mean being second-rate. Sometimes it just meant being chosen by someone who actually saw your worth. And as she stood there in Jonah's arms with the spring stars beginning to appear overhead, Mara understood the profound truth she'd spent her whole life searching for. Belonging wasn't about being wanted by everyone. It was about being truly seen by someone who mattered. And Jonah Reed saw her, all of her, and chose her anyway. That was everything. Spring arrived in earnest after that, transforming the Wyoming landscape from brown and dormant to alive with possibility. The garden that Mara and the women had prepared began to show its first tender shoots, lettuce and radishes, peas climbing their stakes, potato plants spreading their broad leaves. Every morning, Mara walked through the rows with a sense of accomplishment that went bone deep. She'd built this with her own hands, turned dead earth into something that would sustain them. The cattle were thriving too, the winter losses minimal thanks to the storm preparations and the wolf defense. Jonah had started talking about expanding the herd, about breeding programs and long-term plans that assumed Mara would be there to see them through. The casual way he included her in every decision, every plan, still caught her off guard sometimes. She'd spent so long being excluded from her own life that being centered in someone else's future felt like a gift she kept unwrapping. But the past wasn't quite finished with them yet. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April, delivered by the mail courier who made the circuit between Sage Creek and the surrounding ranches. Mara recognized her father's handwriting on the envelope immediately, and her stomach dropped. Jonah saw her face and crossed the kitchen in 3 strides. "What is it?" "Letter from my father." Mara's hands trembled as she held the envelope. "I don't want to open it." "Then don't! Throw it in the fire." Mara was tempted, but some part of her needed to know what Samuel Wells had to say, needed to face whatever poison he'd decided to send across 2,000 miles. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of expensive stationery. The letter was brief and brutal in its efficiency. "Mara, since you have chosen to disregard both family obligation and common decency by remaining in that godforsaken territory with a man you barely know, I am writing to inform you of the following. You are hereby disowned. Your name will be removed from all family documents. You will inherit nothing. Your sister Lena will receive the entirety of the estate, as she should have from the beginning. Furthermore, I have instructed my attorneys to cease all legal action regarding your situation, not because I accept your choices, but because I will not waste further resources on a daughter who has proven herself worthless. You wanted to disappear into the wilderness? Consider yourself disappeared." You are dead to this family. Samuel Wells. Mara read the letter twice, her vision blurring slightly around the edges. Then she walked to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. The expensive paper caught immediately, curling and blackening, her father's careful script disappearing into ash. "What did it say?" Jonah asked quietly. "That I'm disowned, that I'll inherit nothing, that he's done with me." Mara watched the last corner of the letter burn away. "That I'm dead to him." Jonah's arms came around her from behind, solid and warm. "I'm sorry. I'm not." The words surprised her even as she said them, but they were true. "He gave me exactly what I needed, complete freedom. No inheritance to hope for, no family obligation to feel guilty about, no strings he can pull to control me. He thinks he's punishing me, but he's actually setting me free." "You're sure?" Mara turned in his arms, looking up at his concerned face. "I'm sure. That man stopped being my father the day he sent me here as a joke. Everything since then has just been me figuring out that I don't need his approval or his money or his validation. I have something better." "What's that?" "A home I earned, a partner who sees me, a future I chose." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. "He can't take any of that away because he never gave it to me in the first place." Jonah kissed her forehead, his lips warm against her skin. "You're remarkable, you know that? You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." They stood there holding each other while the fire burned low, and Mara felt the last threads connecting her to Philadelphia finally snap. She was entirely her own person now, anchored not to the past, but to this place, this man, this life she was building with her own scarred hands. The following Sunday, they attended the church social that Mrs. Hartley had invited them to. Mara had been nervous about it. Large gatherings of townspeople who'd witnessed her humiliation, who'd heard all the gossip, who knew she was the unwanted sister. But Jonah held her hand as they walked into the church hall, his presence steady and reassuring beside her. The reaction surprised her. Mrs. Hartley greeted them warmly and immediately pulled Mara into a conversation with several other ranch wives. The women asked about the garden, about the cattle, about how she was settling in. They treated her like one of them, not with pity or judgment, but with the easy camaraderie of people who understood the challenges of frontier life. Even Mrs. Patterson was civil, though her civility was clearly forced and came with tight-lipped disapproval. But she didn't make snide comments, didn't try to embarrass Mara publicly. The marshal's visit had apparently made it clear that community harassment wouldn't be tolerated. Vanessa Burke was also present, standing with a group of well-dressed women near the refreshment table. When she saw Mara, something cold and calculating crossed her face. She excused herself from her group and walked over with deliberate purpose. "Mara Reed," she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "How domestic you've become. I hear you're quite the gardener now." "I enjoy the work," Mara said evenly. "How charming, playing at being a ranch wife." Vanessa's smile was sharp as glass. "Though I suppose when you have nothing else to offer, manual labor becomes a virtue." Before Mara could respond, Jonah appeared at her side, his hand finding the small of her back. "Vanessa, still spreading poison, I see. Some things never change." "I'm simply making conversation with your wife, Jonah. Surely you don't object to that." "I object to you treating her with disrespect." His voice was quiet, but carried an edge that made several nearby conversations pause. "Mara is worth 10 of you, and everyone here knows it. She works harder, contributes more to this community, and has more integrity in her little finger than you've managed in your entire life. So you can take your snide comments and your thinly veiled insults and keep them to yourself. Or better yet, why don't you go back to your husband and your big ranch and stop trying to make everyone else miserable because you're unhappy with your own choices?" The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room was on them. Vanessa's face went white, then red. "How dare you?" "I dare because it's true," Jonah said flatly, "and I'm done pretending otherwise. You had your chance with me, Vanessa. You chose money and status over partnership and honesty. That was your decision. But you don't get to punish Mara for the fact that I found something real with her. You don't get to make her feel small because you're empty inside." Vanessa stood there trembling with rage and humiliation, unable to form words. Then she turned and walked out of the church hall, her expensive skirt swishing behind her. Her group of friends followed uncertainly, leaving a wake of whispers. Mrs. Hartley started clapping, slowly, deliberately. Then the woman beside her joined in, and then another, until half the room was applauding. Not for the spectacle, but for the honesty. For someone finally saying what everyone had been thinking about Vanessa Burke's behavior for years. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat and suggested they all move on to the meal, and gradually the tension dissipated into normal social interaction. But people kept coming up to Jonah and Mara throughout the afternoon, offering quiet words of support, sharing their own stories of dealing with Vanessa's cruelty. By the time they left, Mara felt like she'd been fully welcomed into the community in a way she hadn't expected. She wasn't the unwanted bride anymore. She was simply Mara Reed, a woman who worked hard and stood her ground and had earned her place. The ride home was peaceful, the spring afternoon warm and bright. Jonah drove the wagon with one hand, his other arm around Mara's shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for defending me, for standing up to her." "You would have handled it yourself," Jonah said, "but I've been wanting to say those things to Vanessa for years. You just gave me the excuse." Still, it meant something, hearing you say it in front of everyone, hearing you claim me publicly like that. "I'll claim you every day if I need to," Jonah said. "I'm not ashamed of you, Mara. I'm proud of you. Proud to be married to you. And I want everyone to know it." That night, they made love for the first time with true tenderness rather than tentative exploration. Jonah was gentle and patient, treating Mara like she was precious, and she responded with an openness that came from finally feeling safe enough to be vulnerable. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Jonah traced the calluses on Mara's hands with his fingertips. "These hands built our garden," he said softly, "saved our cattle, pulled me out from under that tree. I love these hands." "They're not elegant," Mara said, "not like Lena's. They're real, they're strong, they're yours." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "And I love every scar and callus, because they tell the story of how hard you've worked to build this life with me." Mara felt tears slide down her temples into her hair. "I love you, Jonah Reed. I didn't mean to, didn't plan to, but I do. Completely." "I love you too," he said. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving to you that being chosen second doesn't mean being second best. It just means being chosen by someone who actually knows what he's looking at." They fell asleep holding each other, and Mara dreamed of a future full of gardens and cattle and children who would grow up knowing they were wanted, knowing they belonged, knowing that love could be built on honesty and partnership as much as on passion and romance. Summer arrived with its punishing heat and endless work. The garden flourished under Mara's care, producing more vegetables than they could eat. She learned to preserve and pickle and put up stores for the winter. The cattle thrived, and Jonah made good on his plan to expand the herd, purchasing 10 more head from a neighboring rancher. They worked from dawn to dark most days, but they worked together, and that made all the difference. Jonah taught Mara to rope and brand, to judge the quality of breeding stock, to manage the financial side of the ranch. She taught him about companion planting and crop rotation, about making the limited resources of the frontier stretch further through careful planning. They were building an empire in miniature, not large or impressive by the standards of ranches like Vanessa's husband owned, but theirs, earned through sweat and stubbornness and refusal to quit. In August, Mara realized she'd missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then told Jonah one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I think I'm pregnant," she said simply. Jonah went very still. Then he turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "You're sure?" "Not completely, but all the signs are there." "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified," Mara admitted, "and happy, and nervous about whether I'll be a good mother since I never really had an example of what that looks like." She paused. "How do you feel about it?" Jonah pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, like everything just became real in a way it wasn't before. Like we're not just building this ranch for ourselves anymore, but for someone else. Someone we're going to love and protect and teach about strength and honesty and choosing yourself even when it's hard. "That sounds like a good way to raise a child," Mara said softly. "It's the only way I know how." Mrs. Hartley confirmed the pregnancy a week later, examining Mara with practiced efficiency and declaring her healthy and strong. "You're built for this work," the older woman said. "Between ranch labor and pregnancy, you're going to be exhausted. But you'll manage. You're tougher than most." "I don't feel tough," Mara confessed. "I feel like I'm constantly just barely keeping up." "That's what tough is, child. Not being fearless or never struggling. It's keeping going when things are hard. And you've been doing that since the day you arrived in this territory." Mrs. Hartley patted her hand. "You'll be fine. And you'll have help. That's what community is for." True to her word, the women of Sage Creek rallied around Mara as her pregnancy progressed. They brought baby clothes they'd saved from their own children, shared advice and remedies for morning sickness, helped with the heavier garden work as Mara's body changed and grew. She'd come to Wyoming alone and unwanted, but she was facing motherhood surrounded by support. Jonah was tender and protective without being overbearing, adjusting the workload so Mara wasn't straining herself but still treating her like a capable partner. They prepared a nursery in the small room that had been Mara's when she first arrived, painting it soft yellow and filling it with a cradle Jonah built with his own hands. One evening in late autumn, as they worked on sanding the cradle smooth, Jonah said, "I've been thinking about your father's letter, about you being disowned." Mara's hand stilled on the wood. "Why?" "Because I want to make sure you're legally protected. That if something happens to me, you inherit the ranch outright. That our child inherits it after both of us." He looked at her seriously. "I'm going to Cheyenne next week to have proper legal documents drawn up. Will and testament, deed transfer, everything in writing so nobody can challenge your claim." "Jonah, nothing's going to happen to you." "Probably not. But the prairie's dangerous, Mara. You know that as well as I do. Storms, accidents, wolves, disease, any number of things could go wrong." His voice softened. "I need to know you're protected, that you'll be able to keep this place that we've built together, that our child will have a legacy. Your father disowned you, but I'm claiming you, legally and permanently. You're my heir, my partner, my wife, and I want that in writing." Mara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you for thinking of that, for making sure I'm not vulnerable." "You're never going to be vulnerable again if I have anything to say about it," Jonah said firmly. "Not to your father, not to people like Vanessa, not to anyone. You've earned everything we have, and I'm going to make damn sure everyone knows it." He made the trip to Cheyenne the following week, returning with legal documents that left no ambiguity about Mara's status. She was co-owner of Iron Hollow Ranch with full rights of inheritance. Their child would inherit equally regardless of whether it was a son or daughter. Everything was spelled out in clear legal language that even someone like Lawrence Brennan couldn't find loopholes in. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in November. Mara's pregnancy was obvious now, her belly round and full. She moved more slowly but still insisted on doing her share of the work, checking on the cattle, maintaining the house, preparing stores for the long, cold months ahead. On a bitterly cold day in December, Mara went into labor. Mrs. Hartley arrived within an hour of being sent for, bringing 2 other women who had experience with difficult births. They took over the bedroom efficiently, sending Jonah to boil water and prepare clean linens while Mara labored through contractions that seemed to split her apart. The birth was long and hard, lasting from late afternoon until nearly dawn the next day. Jonah stayed nearby, holding Mara's hand when she needed him, stepping back when the women needed space to work. He'd faced storms and wolves and every hardship the frontier could throw at him, but watching Mara in pain nearly broke him. Finally, as the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, a baby's cry filled the house. "A girl," Mrs. Hartley announced, her face beaming. "Healthy lungs, strong heartbeat, all fingers and toes accounted for." Jonah appeared in the doorway, his face white, but his eyes bright. The women cleaned this baby quickly and wrapped her in soft blankets, then placed her in Mara's arms. She was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything. Mara looked down at her daughter and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. This child would never be unwanted, would never be compared to a sibling and found lacking, would never be sent away as a joke or a punishment. This child would be loved fiercely and completely, raised to know her worth, taught that strength and character mattered more than appearance or society's expectations. "She's beautiful," Jonah whispered, settling carefully on the bed beside Mara. He touched the baby's tiny hand with one rough finger, and she immediately gripped it with surprising strength. "She's strong," Mara said. "Like her father." "Like her mother," Jonah corrected. "What should we name her?" They discussed names but never settled on anything definitively. Now, looking at her daughter's serious little face, Mara knew exactly what felt right. "Sarah," she said, "after your mother. So she knows where she came from, who built this place that will be hers someday." Jonah's eyes filled with tears. "My mother would have loved that, would have loved you both." He kissed Mara's forehead gently. "Thank you for giving me this, for being brave enough to stay when you could have left, for building a life with me even when it was hard. Thank you for seeing me," Mara said softly, "for choosing me when I wasn't what you expected, for making me believe I was worth choosing." They sat together in the early morning light, their daughter asleep between them, and Mara marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She'd been sent to Wyoming as a cruel joke, expected to fail, expected to confirm every negative thing her father had ever believed about her. Instead, she'd found strength she didn't know she possessed. She'd claimed a home, built a partnership, earned the respect of a community that had been ready to dismiss her. She'd turned rejection into belonging, humiliation into dignity, unwanted into chosen. The ranch spread around them, harsh and beautiful, demanding and rewarding, exactly what Mara had needed even when she didn't know it. This land had tested her in every possible way, had stripped away all her illusions and pretenses, had shown her who she really was beneath all the hurt and doubt. And who she was, it turned out, was strong enough to survive anything. Over the following months, as winter slowly gave way to spring, life at Iron Hollow Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Sarah grew quickly, her serious eyes taking in everything, her grip strong even as an infant. Mara learned to work with a baby strapped to her back, to balance motherhood and partnership and all the endless demands of ranch life. It was exhausting and overwhelming and occasionally felt impossible, but it was also deeply fulfilling in a way Mara had never imagined. She was building something that would outlast her, not just the ranch, but a legacy of strength and honesty, and choosing yourself even when the world told you you weren't enough. Jonah was a devoted father, gentle with Sarah, but also treating her like a person deserving of respect even as a tiny baby. He talked to her while he worked, explaining what he was doing and why, including her in the rhythms of ranch life from her earliest days. "She needs to know this place," he explained to Mara one evening as he walked the fence line with Sarah in his arms. "Needs to understand that it was built with hard work and honesty. That nothing here was given, it was all earned." "She'll know," Mara assured him. "We'll make sure she knows." News from Philadelphia came sporadically. Lena had married well to a banker with money and social standing. Their father was aging poorly, growing bitter and isolated. None of it mattered to Mara anymore. That life belonged to someone else. To the girl she'd been before Wyoming had carved away everything soft and shown her what she was really made of. On a warm day in June, nearly 2 years after Mara had first arrived at Iron Hollow Ranch, a small package arrived in the mail. It was addressed to Mara Reed, and the return address was Philadelphia. Mara opened it carefully and found a letter from Lena. "Mara, I'm writing because Father is dying, and he asked me to contact you. He wants to see you before the end, wants to apologize for how he treated you. I told him it was too late for apologies, that you'd built a life for yourself that doesn't include him. But he insisted I write. I won't pretend to understand your choices. Living in the wilderness, working like a common laborer, raising a child in such primitive conditions, it all seems mad to me. But I will admit that you seem happy in the few photographs you've sent, and that's more than I can say for myself. I married for money and status, just like Father wanted. My husband is wealthy and respected. We have a beautiful home and want for nothing. And I'm miserable. He treats me like a decoration, expects me to be silent and ornamental, forbids me from having opinions or interests beyond social events. I'm trapped in a gilded cage, and I put myself there. You were sent away as punishment, but I think perhaps it was the greatest gift Father ever gave you. You found freedom, you found partnership, you found yourself. I don't expect you to come see Father. I wouldn't blame you if you burned this letter without responding, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I didn't understand then. You were always stronger than me, braver, more real. I hope you're happy, Mara. I hope that ranch and that man and that baby give you everything father's approval never could. Your sister, Lena. Mara read the letter twice, then showed it to Jonah. He read it in silence, then looked at her with questioning eyes. Do you want to go see him? He asked. Your father? No, Mara said without hesitation. He had years to apologize, years to treat me with basic decency. The fact that he waited until he was dying doesn't make it meaningful. It just makes it convenient for him. And Lena? I feel sorry for her. But her choices are hers to live with, just like mine are mine to live with. Mara folded the letter carefully. I might write back to her. Tell her that she can always visit if she wants to see what real freedom looks like. But I'm not going back to Philadelphia. That's not my home anymore. This is your home, Jonah said. Yes, Mara agreed, looking around at the ranch she'd helped build, the house they'd made into a home, the daughter sleeping peacefully in her cradle. This is exactly where I belong. She wrote back to Lena, a brief letter that acknowledged their father's impending death without forgiveness or bitterness. She invited her sister to visit Iron Hollow Ranch if she ever wanted to see what a different kind of life looked like. She signed it with love, because despite everything, Lena was still her sister. Whether Lena would ever take her up on the offer, Mara didn't know. But the door was open if she wanted it. 3 months later, word came that Samuel Wells had died. Mara felt nothing at the news. No grief, no relief, just a vague sense of closure. The man who'd tried to make her feel worthless was gone, and she was still here, thriving, building a legacy that would outlast his by generations. As autumn painted the Wyoming landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Mara stood in the garden with Sarah on her hip, showing her daughter the vegetables they'd grown together. Sarah babbled happily, reaching for the bright orange pumpkins, and Mara felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was what her father had tried to destroy, the simple, honest life built on partnership and hard work, and choosing each other every single day. He'd failed spectacularly. She'd turned his cruel joke into the foundation of something beautiful. Jonah joined them in the garden, slipping his arm around Mara's waist and kissing the top of Sarah's head. They stood there together as the sun set over the mountains, 3 people bound by choice and love and the land they'd claimed as their own. I was thinking, Jonah said quietly, about expanding the house, adding another bedroom, maybe 2, in case Sarah wants siblings. Mara smiled, leaning into his warmth. I think she'd like that, and I think I would too. Good, because I want to fill this place with children who know they're wanted, who grow up understanding that they're enough exactly as they are. Children who learn that being chosen honestly is better than being chosen first. We'll teach them, Mara said, together. They walked back to the house as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah drowsy against Mara's shoulder. Inside, the fire was banked warm, and dinner waited on the stove. All the simple, ordinary comforts of home. Mara had traveled 2,000 miles to become a joke, a punishment, a reminder of everything she supposedly wasn't. Instead, she'd become exactly who she was meant to be. A woman strong enough to claim her own worth, brave enough to build a life on her own terms, wise enough to recognize that love earned through partnership was worth infinitely more than love given for superficial reasons. Iron Hollow Ranch would never be the biggest spread in Wyoming. It would never impress people with its size or wealth, but it would be honest. It would be real. It would be home to generations who knew that being unwanted by some people just meant you hadn't found your people yet. And Mara had found hers, in this harsh, beautiful land, in this stubborn, honest man. In this life they were building one difficult day at a time. She'd been sent here to fail. Instead, she'd succeeded in ways her father could never have imagined, building something he would never understand. A life of dignity, purpose, and love that didn't depend on anyone's approval but her own. As she settled Sarah in her cradle and joined Jonah in their bed, Mara whispered a truth into the darkness that she'd spent 25 years learning. I'm exactly where I belong. And Jonah, holding her close, whispered back, forever. Not for now. Forever. The Wyoming wind sang around the house, and inside 3 hearts beat in perfect rhythm. A family chosen, not by accident or obligation, but by the kind of honest love that could weather any storm. Mara Wells had been unwanted, but Mara Reed was treasured beyond measure. And that made all the difference. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. In a world that moves so quickly, the fact that you chose to pause and listen even to someone else's journey is something truly meaningful. Some stories don't need to be loud to matter. They unfold quietly, the way a person slowly learns to believe in themselves after being hurt, misunderstood, or even overlooked. And maybe what lingers with us isn't the big turning points, but the quiet strength of someone who still chooses kindness, even when life hasn't been kind to them. There is something deeply human in that. Not everyone begins with advantages. Not everyone is welcomed right away. Some people enter others' lives as a replacement, a joke, or even a mistake. And yet, they become the ones who stay, the ones who gently, almost invisibly, change everything. Sometimes, a person's worth is not defined by how the world first sees them, but by how they choose to live when no one is standing beside them. Maybe, at some point, you felt like you weren't enough, not attractive enough, not capable enough, not worthy of being chosen. Maybe you've been placed somewhere you never wanted to be, feeling like you didn't belong, like you were just an extra in someone else's story. But life has a quiet, unexpected way of rearranging things. It places us in situations we don't understand, only to give us the chance to see ourselves more clearly, to discover a value we didn't even know we had. Not everyone realizes that right away. Sometimes it takes time to understand that you don't have to become who others expect you to be. You only need to become who you truly are. And when that happens, you no longer need to chase acceptance, because your presence, just as it is, becomes enough. There are feelings that don't begin with sparks, but with patience, not with grand promises, but with small, consistent acts, repeated day after day. A look without judgment, a moment of listening without rushing, a quiet decision to stay, even when leaving would be easier. We often think love must arrive quickly, clearly, and intensely. But sometimes, real love comes slowly, slow enough for two people to heal what was once broken inside them. And when it does, we begin to understand that being chosen is not the most important thing. What matters more is being seen, being understood, and being with someone who allows you to stop pretending. Perhaps, in the end, what this story leaves behind is not just a happy ending, but a sense of quiet ease. A reminder that even if life begins in unfair ways, it can still lead us to something gentle. That wounds, when held with care, can become the place where light enters. That some people come into our lives not to hurt us, but to remind us that we are worthy of kindness. And if today you find yourself in a place that feels uncertain, still searching, still trying to find where you belong, maybe you don't need to rush. Not every story needs immediate answers. Not every journey reveals its meaning from the beginning. Sometimes, simply continuing forward, while keeping your heart soft, is already enough. Trust that. There are good things quietly making their way toward you, in their own time, and in a way that only you can receive. And maybe, one day, when you look back, you will realize that the moments you once thought were the hardest were actually the beginning of something beautiful.